Chapter 1252. Even if Toydley said he looked down on Audiobook, but in reality, from his furrowed brows, it could be seen that he did not take this battle lightly. Apollo lied man, the sun messenger, had died at Audiobook's hands. Tank couldn't help pondering how Audiobook had defeated the sun emissary when there was also a huge disparity in their realms. As a swordsman, Tank unsheathed his silver greatsword from his waist. The full name of his sword was Silver God of War, or Silver God. Tank's expression was unperturbed. After his experience fighting the hollow spirits, he could now tell whether a person had been infected by the hollow spirits from their aura. Of course, this method might not be completely accurate. However, the war chariot's aura was stable, and its breath was filled with dense spiritual energy. There was a clear difference between him and the inhuman snake. Thus, the chances of the war chariot being infiltrated by the hollow were very low, but Audiobook still felt a little uneasy. He stared at the great sword in Tank's hand that emanated thick silver radiance and frowned slightly, instinctively sensing that something was not right. Your sword. Audiobook felt that there was something wrong with this silver great sword, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Anyone can talk big. Today, you will die for sure. The star emissary calculated that I have a 95% chance of winning this battle. At this moment, Tank was wielding the silver greatsword. He raised it high and slashed in the direction of the academic building. The 10-meter-tall silver sword chi slashed out, creating an earth-shattering sound. The ground was split in two. The entire school building was cut in half in an instant, and then it collapsed, the rubble and debris splattering everywhere. With just one slash of Tank's sword, one of number 60 High's school buildings was razed to the ground and reduced to rubble. Standing in the ruins, Audiobook looked around. Only then did he realize that it wasn't just the principal's office. All the desks and chairs in the classroom, as well as the equipment used in teaching, had been cleared and taken away. It seemed like Headmaster Chen had long predicted that there would be a battle today. Thus, he thought that he could take advantage of this battle to give number 60 High a free demolition. At that moment, Audiobook marveled in his heart at Headmaster Chen's calculations. It was really scary to have such an economical man as the principal, but the truth was that he and Headmaster Chen had a tacit understanding. This was also the reason why he had chosen number 60 High School. Number 60 High's renovation was imminent. If the old didn't go, the new wouldn't come. Hiring someone to demolish the house would cost extra money, so it was better to do it this way. After that strike, Tank stared at Audiobook, who was standing in the rubble. That strike just now was so powerful that it could split the land within dozens of li in two, let alone destroy a school building. But what surprised Tank was that his blade aura was blocked by a barrier when it reached the back of the teaching block. Then, his powerful sword chi melted into the barrier like a clay ox disappearing into the sea. What was that thing? The war chariot emissary felt a little apprehensive. After seeing the silver greatsword's astonishing destructive power, Audiobook was glad that his plan to have Senior Bai Qiao turn into a sword sheath cage to surround number 60 High School had been correct. This cage could only be entered, but not exited. Moreover, it could block all the energy, preventing their battle from spreading to other places. As expected of a foundation under the alliance. Any random emissary has the battle strength of a true immortal. Audiobook just smiled faintly. In all fairness, I think SBP is a very promising organization. You once established this foundation to expose the truth. But now, you've deviated from your original intentions and have become an organization that buries the truth. If everyone in your organization was like Mr. Klein and had the sincerity to pursue the truth, there wouldn't be so many problems now. Hearing this, Tank was blank and didn't say anything. Indeed, he couldn't refute Audiobook's words. But in this world, people would die for wealth, just as birds would die for food. Who could be completely virtuous? Now that the world is suffering from the disaster of the Void invasion, the foundation that was supposed to expose the truth has chosen to pretend to be deaf and mute. Let me ask you, Mr. Tank, do you know nothing at all? The so-called true immortal is just a name for a realm. You call yourselves immortals, but you may not have the strength of an immortal. Audiobook's words finally caused Tank's expression to change drastically. In a few words, Audjwa had already poked at Tank's sore spot. You say I'm not an immortal? I actually say I'm not an immortal. He was so angry that he was almost trembling, as if he had suffered some great humiliation. His furious gaze pierced through the silver helmet and landed directly on Audjwa's face, making him feel a little itchy. Audjwa, you're definitely going to die today. The next moment, Toydre took a deep breath. He brandished the silver greatsword and then abruptly thrust it into the ground. Tremendous spirit power fluctuations instantly spread out, and then gradually solidified in the air. It was a group of snow-white Cheelants wrapped in impenetrable silver armor. Is this the sword spirit of the Een God Greatsword? Audjwa's pupils contracted slightly. This sword spirit was extraordinarily huge. At least to Audjwa's knowledge, this sword spirit's size had already exceeded the norm. From a distance, it looked like a monster that had landed on Earth from another planet. In front of this sword spirit, a human body was as tiny as an ant. There was something wrong with this sword spirit. Audjwa frowned deeply as he looked at this snow Cheelan, which was hundreds of feet tall. He could even sense that the oppressive aura emanating from this sword spirit was already greater than that of Toydre himself. Very quickly, Audjwa figured out what on earth was going on. You made your sword spirit accept the void? There was no mistaking it. He could sense from this snow Cheelan the same way that Snake did, that it had been invaded by a hollow spirit. At that moment, the snow Cheelan had been summoned as a sword spirit, and rather than roar, it was more like wailing. Although Audjwa didn't know what method the Foundation had used to actually control a hollow spirit and a sword spirit to merge, he could hear that as a sword spirit, the snow Cheelan was instinctively resisting a hollow spirit. The hollow spirit's invasion was devouring the snow Cheelan's will, and it was feeling pain. Have you finally realized, Audjwa? Toydre laughed wildly. At first, I wasn't going to use this trump card, because the fusion between my sword spirit and the hollow spirit isn't perfect. It's very easy for it to go berserk. But now I've thought it through. This isn't my land, so why should I be so polite? Hearing this, Audjwa's face was expressionless. Everything was just as he had thought. Not only did the Foundation have a lot of information on the hollow spirit, it now looked like they even had secret experiments on them. They had actually turned around and used the hollow spirit to merge it with a weapon spirit, thereby multiplying the power of a magic weapon by tens of thousands of times. Feeling the sword spirit monster which he had created with his own hands, Toydre stared at Audjwa and smiled sinisterly. To tell you the truth, when I saw my sword spirit grow because of the hollow spirit's power, even I was a little tempted. Do you know why I investigated Yi Jiang? He's my flesh and blood, and I wanted to see how strong the bastard born of that bitch could become after being invaded by a hollow spirit. Hearing this, Audjwa spat on the spot. This scum. Chapter 1253. On a high-rise building dozens of meters away from number 60 High's battlefield. A beautiful and dignified nun with a veil gazed at the battle in front of her. She had been brought here 3 minutes after Tank had arrived. She had wanted to directly go in and declare war on Audjwa. But the battle between Tank and Audjwa had already begun. Thus, Moon decided to stay on the side and watch, and collect information on Audjwa in passing. At that moment, a young man's voice rang out from behind Moon. Mother Teresa, you really are the Moon emissary. Mother Teresa wanted to turn around, but the voice stopped her. Don't turn around, I don't want anyone to know what I look like, said the young man. Judging from this sexy and magnetic voice, this was probably a good-looking young man. Teresa obeyed and didn't turn her head. She smiled slightly. Let me guess, you're Star. Only you can calculate who I am. Smart woman, said the voice behind her. At that moment, the Star emissary was hiding in the shadows. He was the third person to arrive. After calculating Moon's position, he had come here of his own accord to watch the battle with Moon. Moon, Tank said that you gave him a 95% chance of winning? Star, that's right. Moon shook his head. But I don't think his battle will be easy. He's even using his trump card now. It's a semi-void magic artifact formed by fusing a hollow spirit and a sword spirit. This is something the Foundation is still experimenting with. Someone has to put it into practice. I still don't think it'll be a problem. At that moment, Star's expression was still calm. How about this? I'll calculate his chances of winning again. How long will it take? Very soon, 2 minutes will be enough. Abandoning his wife and son, experimenting with a sword spirit whom he had given birth to and had absolute trust in him, and not even sparing his own son. By the time Tank said his lines, Audiobook was already furious. He was trying hard to suppress his anger. He couldn't let his emotions affect the battle at hand. For scum like Tank, killing him with one sword strike would be letting him off too easily. Moreover, Audiobook was still thinking about how to save Silver God. Although the Snow Kirin had obtained unparalleled power due to the invasion of the void creatures, it was also suffering a great deal of pain. Right now, the Snow Qilin was like a balloon that was already at its limit. It could explode at any time. But to Tank, the Silver God Greatsword was perhaps as meaningful as the women he had played with. Even if it was broken, it was just a matter of replacing it. Open the gate. At that moment, Audiobook exhaled slightly. In the morning, he had already used the spiritual energy of 6 reservoirs to increase his level. And now, he was playing the same trick again. Raising his cultivation level was also to increase the strength of his physical body. This was to ensure that his physical body would not be affected by the huge impact and collapse in the next attack. It's actually the Heaven's Path divine art. An excited smile appeared on War Chariot's face. Audiobook didn't disappoint. And he now knew why Sun had died at Audiobook's hands. However, this kind of increase in realm was only temporary. The biggest taboo was to fight a protracted war. So when War Chariot saw Audiobook use 33 Path Primordial Chi, he had already made up his mind. That was to attack first, and if things went south, he would choose a delaying tactic. Once Audiobook's temporary increase wore off, he would counterattack. Unfortunately, this was a wishful thinking. Audiobook had no intention of leaving anything for War Chariot. At that moment, Audiobook spread out his right hand, and the peachwood sword in it lit up with brown spirit light. Little by little, it attached itself to his entire body. When Jinka's sword chi enveloped Audiobook's entire body, the outer layer made of sword chi was like the iron scales of battle armor, which appeared piece by piece on Audiobook's suit jacket. This sword, looking at this scene, War Chariot couldn't help sweating. The peachwood sword that he had previously looked down upon actually brought him a huge sense of oppression at this time. Involuntarily, War Chariot felt the armor on his body actually start to become heavier. It wasn't because the armor had become heavier, but because the pressure on his mind had increased. This was very much like a natural spirit beast's stress response when it encountered its natural enemy. The spirit will become tense in an instant. Then, his breathing would become heavy. Sweat would start to ooze from his body. Even incontinence, Audiobook, holding this mind-shaking peachwood sword, walked toward War Chariot step by step like a zenith heaven golden immortal descending from the sky. When he came back to his senses, Audiobook was already less than 3 meters in front of War Chariot. Because of his spiritual fear, War Chariot was astonished to find that his mind had actually gone blank for a period of time, and he had blacked out. That was impossible. How could he, the Grand War Chariot, die here? The star emissary had clearly divined for him. His chances of winning were as high as 95%. Silver God. Ram them to death. In his panic, War Chariot started to order the Snow Qilin behind him. But what shocked War Chariot was, the Snow Qilin merely roared once and didn't follow his instructions. Audiobook didn't need to think to know how much the Snow Qilin was struggling in its heart at that moment. Its main body's will was clearly still engaged in a fierce struggle with the hollow spirits. In addition, the Snow Qilin had already sensed that the enemy it was facing was the Lord of the Sword Spirits. How could it, a mere sword spirit, attack the great Lord of the Sword Spirits? The Snow Qilin's strong desire to live caused its mental state to collapse even further, and it started to struggle with the hollow spirits that had invaded its body for the will of the spiritual space. Roar. After an earth-shattering roar, the snow Qilin raised its front hooves. But it wasn't aiming at Audjua. Its front hooves slammed down hard on the top of War Chariot's head. Damn it. Damn it. I'm your master. Aren't you afraid of the backlash from the contract? Toydley would never have dreamed that this would actually happen. He couldn't understand why his sword spirit wouldn't listen to him. Even less could he understand why the sword spirit of the Silver God Greatsword would turn around and attack him, its master. You reap what you sow. At that moment, Audjua's lips curled up slightly. In front of the Lord of the Sword Spirits, any identity as a sword master was useless. Those so-called sword spirit contracts were just pieces of scrap paper. It's time for you to be free, Silver God. Audjua looked at the berserk snow Qilin, raised Jinka, and gently waved it in the air. In a flash, the sword spirit contract between Silver God and War Chariot was directly severed. The roar then stopped, and the whole world fell silent. Without the contract, the snow Qilin instantly turned into particles of light. It was no longer anyone's slave. Instead, it returned to being the spirit of all living things, and waited for a new master who was worthy of its wholehearted trust to appear. Audjua's sword. It turned the contract into scrap paper, and also destroyed the hollow spirit attached to the snow Qilin's body. It forcibly severed the contract. The astonishing backlash instantly hit War Chariot himself, causing him to spit up a mouthful of blood. At that moment, War Chariot was in a terrible state. After being trampled by the snow Qilin, half of his body had sunk into the ground, and now he had suffered internal injuries from the backlash. The outcome of the battle was already very clear. Audjua sneered. Looking at War Chariot's battered and exhausted appearance, he still didn't feel the slightest bit of pity in his heart. He slashed out with sword chi. He only used a tiny bit of Jinka's strength. That indestructible sword chi completely disintegrated War Chariot's armor on the spot. This layer of armor is your shame. Now, I've even torn off your underwear. Audjua stared at War Chariot, who was lying on the ground with fear in his eyes, and said lightly, by the way, I'll also sever your spirit root with this sword. The whole process took less than 2 minutes, and the battle was already over. On the other side of the tall building, the star emissary cried out in alarm, impossible. What the hell is this? He was frightened by the huge variable in his deduction. What did you calculate? The moon emissary was also amazed at that moment. She had seen Audjua end the battle with just 2 sword strikes. The star emissary also spat up a mouthful of blood at that moment. I saw the peachwood sword in Audjua's hand, and its scabbard. He had seen Audjua enter number 60 high with Jinka in his left hand and the white scabbard in his right. He had just taken a peek at it. In the blink of an eye. His spirit had suffered a terrible backlash, and he had been directly blinded in one eye. A peachwood sword and a scabbard? What on earth are you talking about? These 2 things turned the situation around greatly and increased Audjua's chances of winning. The star emissary simply didn't dare believe the data he had calculated. A 200 quadrillion% chance of winning. This was simply holding a father in his left hand and a mother in his right. What the hell, a plant? Chapter 1254. The star emissary would never have dreamed that the battle would be over before it had even started. Mother Teresa was an honest person. She had in fact already heard the sound of Star vomiting blood, but remembering that Star had told her before not to look back, she stayed where she was and didn't move. Star, are you all right? To be honest, she was very nervous. As one of the Foundation's emissaries, she had watched helplessly as an emissary was seriously injured before he had even officially joined the battlefield. This was a very complicated feeling for Teresa. Was this Audjua a monster? If you need my help, just ask. I have some healing methods, Teresa said. In fact, she wasn't a combat type, but a supportive healer. In the world of healers, she was even known as the mother of all stars. No need, you can't help me. Star said weakly. He had already taken the tonic he carried with him. But at most, this medicine could only help him recover from his internal injuries. The damage to his vision was probably already irreversible. He had directly lost his sight in his right eye, and his remaining left eye was about 2,000 degrees short-sighted, which was almost no different from being blind. Now that the star emissary had opened his eyes, there was only a trace of chilling light left in his left eye. It had taken him hundreds of years to hone this pair of eyes that could peer into the secrets of heaven, but he had never expected to suffer such a devastating blow in an instant. He had even anticipated that there was something strange about Audiobook, but hadn't dared look at him. He had just flashed back and glanced at him. In the end, he had ended up like this. There's only judgment and fate left. Teresa sighed. She felt that the fool's emissary was also an expert, but she didn't know why the judgment emissary had suddenly excluded him. But Teresa was well aware that if she wanted to survive in the Foundation, the best way was to not ask too many questions. She would just go with the flow. Back then, she had only joined the Foundation for the high reward it offered her. The wisest choice was to protect herself for the sake of the reward. So when she saw that the chariot in front of her was seriously injured, she didn't have the slightest intention of helping it. Audiobook was too scary, going up now would be courting death. Nowadays, the judgment emissary basically had the final say in the Foundation. Teresa didn't think it was worth risking her life to save a chariot. She even thought that Audiobook had fought well. Shouldn't this scumbag who treated women as toys be taught a lesson? Currently, Tank was completely naked and buried in the ground. He was already crippled. His spirit root had been severed and he had lost all his realms. In addition, his upper body was seriously injured. Now, even an ordinary person could give him one last stab. And now, Tank had clearly lost his mind. The double blow to his body and mind made it impossible for him to accept everything that was happening in front of him. I'm an immortal. I'm really an immortal. He kept muttering these words as his eyes lost focus. After this incident, Tank would probably spend the rest of his life in a mental hospital. Audiobook felt that this was the best punishment for such a person. At the same time, Audiobook once again marveled at Jinka's terrifying strength. To be able to sever one's spirit root without harming one's life, apart from this sword spirit master, there was probably no other sword spirit in this world that could achieve such accuracy. If an ordinary cultivator's spirit root were to be severed, they would definitely die. At that moment, Audiobook heard a few scattered claps from outside the school gate. He raised his head and saw a man in a black cloak approaching him from the direction of his line of sight. The man clapped his hands as he walked into number 60 high school. He took off his big hood, and Audiobook saw the black mask under which the word "Fate" was written in red. Judging from the color of his hair, he seemed to be an Asian. Book of Sage Immortal had sent Audiobook almost all the information on the Foundation's emissaries, including the judge, Su Bai. But Book of Sage Immortal was still investigating this Fate emissary. At that moment, the Fate emissary had appeared. Audiobook was also speculating about his identity. Judging from the color of his hair, he seemed to be an Asian. Are you from Huaxiao? As expected, Director Zhua is smart. The voice of the Fate emissary under the Fate mask was clearly altered. It seemed that this Fate emissary was hiding his identity. I never thought that not all of the Foundation's emissaries would be foreigners, said Audiobook. Jinka in hand, he was ready to fight. Audiobook, are you here for Tank, for revenge? Then let's begin. Let me say this first, I'm not here for Tank. I'm fighting for myself. The Fate emissary said, before Tank came, I already expected this situation. It's just that it's going to be a little more tragic than I imagined. Listening to Fate's words, Audiobook somehow felt that this person's tone was familiar, as if he had met him before, but he couldn't put his finger on who the other party was. You say you're fighting for yourself? Audiobook wasn't in a hurry to make a move, he wanted to get more information out of Fate. I've taken a fancy to your wooden sword. If you give it to me, not only will you avoid a fight, you'll also be able to save your own life. Wearing the Fate mask, he said this very calmly. Unlike Tank and Snake's boundless conceit, it was as if victory was truly in his grasp. Snake and Tank both died at my hands. Are you confident that you can beat me? Audjwa looked at him. Like Tank, this fate emissary's aura was pure and hadn't been invaded by the ethereals. But with the experience of fighting Tank, Audjwa was also wary of the magic weapons that fate might use. The people of the Foundation were a bunch of lunatics. God knew if fate had injected the ethereal into its magic instrument or not. Don't worry, I'm not like a despicable person like Tank. I'm truly capable. The fate emissary stepped forward at that moment. He then took out his weapon, which was an emerald green bamboo. The bamboo had been shaved to a very sharp point, like a blade. Under the faint light, its entire body exuded a luster similar to that of amber glass. Audjwa was instantly on guard. The greatest truths were simple. The simpler a weapon looked, the more unparalleled its power might be. Wasn't the peachwood sword in his hand such an existence? Do you know the Sword of Destiny, Director Zhua? At that moment, the fate emissary raised his head and looked at Audjwa. I have a feeling that the Sword of Destiny in my hand might come from the same place as the peachwood sword in your hand. As soon as he said this, he vanished into thin air. In a flash, he appeared behind Audjwa in the blink of an eye. You're slow to react, Director Zhua. But it's also fate that you were stabbed by me. As soon as he said this, the bamboo sword instantly pierced through the sword chi wrapping Audjwa's body and stabbed him in the kidney. Audjwa felt as if a foreign object had invaded him from behind, and blood dripped down the tip of the bamboo. It actually pierced through Lord Jinka's sword chi. Shocked, Audjwa clenched his teeth and pulled his body out of her. No, not pierced, but ignored. At that moment, Jinka's voice rang out inside Audjwa's body. Ignored sword chi? What on earth is this? Hearing Jinka's words, Audjwa was even more astonished. Jinka's voice was calm. It's fine. When Bai Qiao and I combine, we can beat it. Were they finally going to combine? Audjwa nodded. Enduring the pain of his kidney being pierced, he sheathed the peachwood sword. Chapter 1255. Audjwa believed that there were very few magic weapons in the world that could ignore sword chi, let alone Jinka's sword chi. Being hit by the bucket kidney was indeed painful, but fortunately, it did not directly injure his vitals. At that moment, the peachwood sword's sword chi gently flowed into his wound and healed it. The kidney was a man's key, and this envoy of fate was vicious. Fortunately, he had Jinka's sword chi to protect him, so Audjwa felt that he could still be happy for the rest of his life. Buzz. When Jinka and Bai Qiao became one again, an astonishing sense of oppression swept through the area. The youth dressed in a snow-white fur coat seemed to have come from the Milky Way. Starlight sparkled on his body, and he was so clean that there wasn't a trace of dirt or filth on him. He was like a king who had arrived on the stage, insufferably arrogant. This was Lord Jingbai. Audjwa looked at the figure in front of him in astonishment. At this moment, the young man's feet were off the ground and he was suspended in the air, staring at the messenger of fate before him expressionlessly. He snorted disdainfully, "Trash like this is not worthy to see this king's lineup. I didn't expect that I would force you out in the end." To his surprise, this envoy of fate seemed to know Jingbai's identity. The moment he saw Jingbai appear, the pressure was clearly on fate's side, but for some reason, Audjwa felt that this envoy of fate seemed a little excited. Boom! The next moment, Destiny's aura suddenly surged. It was as if a fountain of energy had erupted from his body like a volcano. This is... Audjwa was surprised. What surprised him was not the sudden increase in aura, but the sword Dao behind this sudden increase in aura. If his judgment was correct, what Destiny was using was General Yi's famous, boundless sword Dao. His true identity was that of a sword saint? Audjwa was astonished. Although he felt that this person was familiar from the beginning, he still felt that this was not the sword saint's style. At this moment, the Fate Envoy, who had activated the limitless sword Dao, laughed maniacally as he forcefully withstood the pressure. At the same time, he used the Sword of Destiny in his hand to predict where he would attack next. Audjwa. Next time, I will pierce through your heart. This is all fate's arrangement. Then, the fate of Ben in high-speed movement. His figure once again disappeared from Aujua's sight. This was a sword technique he had never seen before. First, a preview, then a precise implementation of the content of the preview. It was another incomparably mysterious angle. The bamboo, known as the Sword of Fate, cut in from an angle that Audjua hadn't expected. Like the last attack, it ignored the defensive barrier of sword chi and was aimed at Audjua's heart. Jingbai shook his head, but he was faster than fate. The bamboo sword was only a few centimeters away from his chest. He directly attacked and circled behind Audjua's back. He held the bamboo sword with his index finger. There were only a handful of swords that could ignore his sword chi. There was only one sword that Jingbai could think of. The messenger kept calling his bamboo sword the Sword of Destiny. But in fact, the true name of this bamboo sword spirit was Advance. The Prophecy. A sword spirit that was born in the same place as him. He had even competed with him for the position of the sword spirit master. But in the end, he still won the throne by an overwhelming margin. Even Jingbai hadn't expected that their second meeting would actually be here. Is this the new master you found? Jingbai's face was expressionless as he mercilessly criticized the messenger of fate in front of him. You're really too inferior. On the other side, after stabbing out, Fate tried to pull the bamboo sword away, but found that his sword was firmly stuck to it by a tremendous force. The disparity in strength made it impossible for the Sword of Fate to escape Jingbai's grasp. Get lost, this is fate's arrangement. Jingbai sneered. He returned the words of the messenger of fate without changing them. A sword light shot out of Jingbai's fingertip and traveled along the bamboo sword. This sword light was just a billionth of Jingbai's strength. But it was so fast and strong that it was far beyond what fate could have imagined. Not good. At that moment, fate gritted his teeth. He realized that he had to let go of the bamboo sword. But it was too late. The sword light traveled so fast that, like an electric shock, it swiftly poured into his sword-wielding right hand. In the blink of an eye, a crushing sword intent poured directly into Fate's right fingertip and crushed everything into powder along his finger. Fate reacted swiftly. He knew that he couldn't resist such a ferocious sword intent at all. The next moment, he gritted his teeth and used the finger sword in his left hand to cut off his entire arm along his right shoulder. This was to prevent this sword intent from spreading to the rest of his body. It was only then that Fate started to fear Jingbai. The sword spirit in front of him was too powerful. At the same time, he was deeply aware. He already couldn't take this kind of attack a second time. As a swordsman, the pain of losing one's arm was something that no one could understand. Damn it, at that moment, he stared at the bamboo sword that Jingbai had snatched away, and his heart was filled with hatred. This damned liar. The sword spirit of the Sword of Fate had clearly told him that as long as he had him, he would win every battle. He had actually been swindled by a sword spirit. Winning every battle, it's all fake. Fate roared in pain at that moment. Jingbai Siji laughed when he heard this. He gripped the bamboo sword that he had snatched back from Fate with a rather surprised expression on his face. You actually told him that you would win every battle? Clearly, even Jingbai thought that this was a blatant fraud. During this period of living on Earth, Jingbai knew that there were phone scams and text scams on Earth. The sword spirit's deception, this was the first time he had heard of it. The bamboo shook slightly in Jingbai's hand, as if in response to his question. Audjua felt that after this Sword of Destiny fell into Jingbai's hands, it would be a different story. She was extremely obedient. A few seconds later, after knowing the truth, Jingbai raised his head and stared at the envoys of fate in front of him, who were dizzy with rage. He didn't lie to you. Jingbai said, from the very beginning, the forecast was very clear. He is below 1 spirit but above 10,000 spirits. He is victorious in every battle. Realization instantly dawned on Audjua. It turned out that this messenger of destiny was too excited when he picked up the heaven-defying bamboo sword and only heard the last 4 words, 10,000 battles, 10,000 victories. Listening to the whole sentence, it was indeed not a scam. Above all living beings, with this as a prerequisite, it could indeed be described as 10,000 battles and 10,000 victories. But perhaps even Zhujian himself would not have thought of it. The new master he had decided on. He had actually directly led him to the only man he couldn't beat. Sure enough, all of this had been arranged by fate. Take off your mask, fate. At that moment, Audjua looked at the man in front of him who was deeply involved in the sword spirit's deception. He felt that this envoy of fate's true identity was, either he was Blade Master, or he was someone who was very close to Blade Master. Could it be Evil Sword God? But this guy was still playing landlord in prison. Chapter 1256. Audjua actually always had his own answer to this envoy of fate's speculations. The number of people in this world who understood the limitless sword way was very limited, and the number of people who understood the sword way and could use it skillfully could be counted on one hand. Judging from the proficiency of the emissary of fate, his understanding of limitless sword Dao had already reached the acme of perfection. Apart from Blade Master, he really couldn't think of anyone else who was so proficient in this technique. Although Yi Jiang had displayed this sword principle in the National Body Technique competition. However, there was still a gap between a beginner and a well-practiced one. So, after ruling out the possibility that the envoy of fate was Yi Jiang, Audjua could currently only think of one person. Jingbai folded his arms and blew lightly. Bang! There was a bang. The fate emissary's face immediately cracked and turned into fine powder. After seeing the other party's face clearly, Audjua took a deep breath. It's really you. These 4 short words already proved that Audjua's idea was completely correct. Sword Immortal Fan Rui. Back then, the man who was said to be dead but left behind a bunch of mysteries. In reality, the Battles sect had also obtained some evidence to prove that the Sword Immortal was not dead. At that time, Audjua had come to a basic conclusion. Back then, Sword Immortal Fan Rui put on a great show to help his disciple overcome his mental demons. For many years, the only person in the know, Evil Sword God's senior brother Yi Jianchuan, had been keeping this secret. After that, Sword Immortal Fan Rui completely vanished without a trace. He was like a cloud of smoke that evaporated from the world, disappearing without a trace. The last time he had seen Sword Immortal Fan Rui was in a book called Cultivation Sword Dao History. He saw the black and white photo of Sword Immortal Fan Rui recorded in the history books. Who would have thought that after so many years, he would actually see him in person, and under such circumstances at that? I never thought that after disappearing for so many years, you would actually join the Foundation. Audjua sighed with emotion. He saw Sword Immortal Fan Rui in a sorry state. He really couldn't figure out why an immortal sword immortal who had nurtured a sword sage would choose to join the Foundation. To help the wicked and do those despicable things. Audjua had many questions. He even wanted to curse out loud. But he opened his mouth and said nothing in the end. He recalled what Fan Rui had said to him before the battle, he's fighting for himself. Then the real purpose of him joining the Foundation seemed a bit thought-provoking. I have my own difficulties. You won't understand. Fan Rui stood up. His entire right arm had been cut off, and the ground was covered in blood. Perhaps for someone who had pursued Sword Dao all his life, dying under the world's #1 sword could be considered a kind of romance? Jingbai was expressionless. He acted according to orders and didn't have the slightest bit of mercy for Fan Rui. On the other side, Fan Rui was also doing his best to use the bamboo sword in his hand to take a step forward. The tip of his sword extended forward at a speed of a few millimeters, which could almost be described as minuscule. Audjua didn't know what on earth Fan Rui's objective was. As time passed, he saw that Sword Immortal Fan Rui's body was already starting to crumble under the pressure of the sword barrier's backlash. Starting from the fingertips of his left hand, it turned into fine powder little by little. I've already won this battle, a few seconds later, Fan Rui laughed heartily. This man had completely disappeared from the face of the earth. It wasn't until then that Jingbai's pupils contracted. He already understood the real reason why Fan Rui had challenged him like Quafu chasing the sun. In a sense, that's indeed the case, Jingbai said expressionlessly. What does Lord Jingbai mean? Audjua didn't understand. Fan Rui clearly has a stronger sword Dao, so why does he keep using his disciple's famous technique in battle? Jingbai said. Audjua was a little enlightened at this point. Indeed. As a sword immortal, Fan Rui's sword Dao was also superb. But he had been using General Yi's unique, boundless sword Dao for all his attacks just now. There had to be a deeper meaning behind this. In terms of sword Dao, he's indeed a lunatic. Jingbai gave his final evaluation of Fan Rui's behavior. He never thought that Fan Rui would actually turn around and use him. By challenging him, the world's #1 swordsman, Fan Rui had fused himself with boundless sword Dao, and turned it into the intent of boundless sword Dao. In other words, after Fan Rui's seemingly moth to the flame challenge ended, boundless sword Dao had officially become a branch of sword Dao and heavenly Dao. This had been Fan Rui's goal from the very beginning. After listening to Jingbai's explanation, Audjua was suddenly enlightened. Perhaps this was Fan Rui's way of proving his sword Dao. At the same time, he was also making a final contribution for his disciples and grand disciples. Just like that, this envoy of the Foundation's destiny had fallen. But Audjua knew that the battle wasn't over yet. President Bai, I know you're here. Come on out. At that moment, Audjua turned his gaze in one direction. In the air, a young man with a devilish smile on his face stepped out of the crack. Chapter 1257. In some sense, Audjua felt that President Bai was his Shifu's lifelong enemy. But this lifelong enemy was more miserable. Almost all of his life had been slapped to death with just a few slaps. Audjua didn't know how many blows President Bai had appeared in front of him at that moment. He didn't know how many blows his Shifu could take. Audjua stared at the young man who had come back to life in front of him. He was dressed in a black noble robe with a red moon pattern, and a pure black belt wrapped tightly around his slender waist, making him look tall and straight. His every movement was full of the air of a Western aristocrat. Before being invaded by President Bai, this young man had been called Michelle, and was the owner of Castle of the Dark Knight. It could be seen that although President Bai had become a hollow spirit and invaded Michelle, he hadn't abandoned Michelle's original elegant and noble temperament. At that moment, he gripped his cane and stared in Audjua's direction as he sneered. The former Michelle no longer exists. There was nothing left of the former President Bai. The one standing in front of you now is a new me. My name is Su Bai. An elegant and magnetic male voice rang out. Su Bai didn't speak. Audjua was startled to realize that this voice was actually ringing out directly in his head. Can you feel it? This is the power of a high-level life form. I am all things, and all things are me. This is a power that resonates with all things. Only hollow spirits, who don't have a physical body, can do this easily, Su Bai said calmly. Even with Jingbai present, he was completely unafraid. It was as if he really was invincible. I've realized that you Foundation people have one thing in common, and that is that you're very conceited. Audjua looked at Su Bai as he carefully sensed the young man's fighting strength. Indeed, this Su Bai in front of him seemed to have a very different aura from the void spirits he had fought before. It was different from Snake's aura, and also different from the Silver God Greatsword's sword spirit's aura which had been attached to a hollow spirit. Su Bai's fusion could almost be described as perfect, his entire body was seamless and without the slightest flaw. Audjua, perhaps you've already sensed it. At that moment, Su Bai smiled slightly and said, you shouldn't associate me with trash like Snake and Tank. One of them has just evolved, and the fusion isn't perfect. The other treats the ethereal as his own tool and doesn't understand the meaning of becoming a higher being. Snake was killed by me with a single stroke of my sword. How many sword strikes do you think you can withstand? Audjua also laughed. He really did not know why Su Bai was so confident. Even though this man was different from all the void creatures he had seen before. But no matter how strong Su Bai was, could he be stronger than Lord Jingbai? Audra felt that even if his Shifu Wang Ling hadn't made a move, there was no way Su Bai could have withstood the power of Jingbai's sword. I know, maybe you don't understand what I'm saying, but strength will prove everything in the end. Su Bai was extremely confident. It was different from Snake's ethereal spirit that was transformed from a void magic sphere. He was someone who had been baptized by the Void Lord. At that moment, Su Bai turned the golden cane in his hand, and the scenery around number 60 high abruptly changed. Buzz! Bam! The school square under Audjua's feet instantly turned into quicksand, and then suddenly softened and collapsed. In the blink of an eye, number 60 high's huge school square had actually turned into a bottomless black hole. At the same time, the space around him instantly became weightless, and Audjua's body floated up involuntarily along with the endless rubble around him. This was another void creature's ability, which was called the Void Boundary. It was similar to the intrinsic spirit field of cultivators on Earth. In the blink of an eye, Audjua had already fallen into Su Bai's trap and fallen into this void boundary. At that moment, Su Bai stood in the center of this endless abyss, his cane in hand. He was like a conductor of a carnival symphony, enjoying the thrill of the power of the void. This scene was like the end of the world. Below him was a bottomless abyss, and above him was a void vortex that could swallow up everything. Audjua's body was being torn apart by two forces at the same time. He felt like his body had already been divided into two parts, which no longer belonged to him at all. If it wasn't for Jingbai's protective sword Qi, he might have already become two lumps of flesh. Audjua's expression changed, and the sweat dripping from his temples was sucked up by the void vortex above his head. Left with no choice, he drew his sword and slashed at Su Bai. Tens of thousands of feet of sword Qi. The moment Jingbai swung his sword, it was torn apart by the two forces at the top and bottom. Before it could even get close to Su Bai, it was cleanly dispelled. Audjua, now do you know why I'm not afraid of your sword? Su Bai sighed. Now that we're in my void boundary, I'm the only one who can decide everything. Hearing this, Jingbai's expression changed slightly. This was an extremely rare situation for him, the master of sword spirits. There was a trick to this void boundary. If Jingbai's calculations were correct, there was a power here that was similar to disarming. It didn't just target spirit swords, the power of all magic treasures would be perfectly disintegrated by the two forces at the bottom and bottom. All this time, I've been looking for a reason for my defeat. At that moment, Su Bai, who was standing in the center of the void boundary, said frankly, after countless deductions, I think the only reason for my defeat is magic weapons, Audjua. Su Bai, thank you, Lord, for giving me such a great ability that all magic weapons in the world are useless against me. Wang Ling has been able to run amok in the world for so many years because of that strange peachwood sword in his hand. Including those slaps he gave me, he must have fused them with the power of the peachwood sword. Audjua, so, you attribute all this to the gap between our equipment? Su Bai, isn't that the case? If he wasn't superior to me in terms of magic weapons, how could he have defeated me? Audjua and Jingbai sighed inwardly. It seemed that after dying a few times, this person's IQ hadn't increased at all. This was a sore spot. No matter how many sit-ups he did in his coffin, it was impossible to improve his IQ. Jingbai was silent. The next moment, he turned around and transformed back into his sword form. In his view, this kind of idiot was already completely hopeless. One more look at him and he risked lowering his IQ. Thus, Jingbai couldn't avoid it in time and had no intention of continuing to pay attention to Su Bai's senseless delusion. Although the sword Qi had been devoured, he still had many ways to kill Su Bai. Don't, Lord Jingbai, what will I do if you leave? Audjua cried out in his heart. Haven't you noticed yet? Your Shifu is already here. At that moment, Jingbai's voice rang out in Audjua's mind. When Audjua came back to his senses, a warm hand abruptly rested on his shoulder. It was that man had just finished his homework and was here. Chapter 1258. A long time ago, Wang Ling had summed up several major illusions about fighting. For example, this move works, he's sweating, I must have scared him, this person is very young and his cultivation is shallow, so he shouldn't be hard to deal with, I couldn't beat him before, but I've already become stronger, the battle has just begun, he'll definitely lose if he attacks first. Now, in the face of President Bai, who had made a comeback and was so confident that he had turned into Su Bai. In response to Su Bai's excessive arrogance, Wang Ling had come up with several major illusions about invincibility. He was well aware of Su Bai's current mental state. For example, at the peak of immortals, I am proud of the world, with me, Su Bai, there will be heaven. Another example, heaven does not give birth to Su Bai, eternity is like a long night. For some reason, Wang Ling felt that these domineering proclamations were so laughable when they were used on Su Bai. Clearly, the scariest thing was that he didn't know it. Wang Ling sighed slightly and took the lead in sending Audiobook out of the battlefield. Because he could already hear sirens outside the void boundary. There was no way such a huge fluctuation of spirit power wouldn't attract the attention of the police. So he sent Audiobook out first to stabilize the situation, and at the same time organize the police force to disperse the surrounding people. But to be honest, Wang Ling felt that the battle here would be resolved very quickly. As expected of someone I've taken a fancy to. He was actually able to send someone out of my void boundary. Looking at the scene in front of him, Su Bai was surprised, but even more excited. Logically speaking, once someone was trapped in his void boundary, it would be impossible to get out so easily. But now, Wang Ling had chosen to send Audiobook out. In Su Bai's view, this was simply a touching drama of life and death. He felt that Wang Ling must have paid a heavy price to send Audiobook out of his void boundary and leave him with the hope of survival. After sighing with emotion, Su Bai also gave his own assessment. You treat your disciple pretty well. I'm very touched. Wang Ling felt that this person was already beyond saving. In fact, Wang Ling had come prepared for this trip. He had summed up the lessons he had learned from his fight with President Bai in Chapter 690. Back then, he hadn't finished his homework before he had been dragged into the fight, and the whole process had left him uneasy. So this time, he had finished all his homework and rushed to the scene. Secondly, he had been worried that President Bai would ruin his school uniform the last time they fought. If the school uniform was damaged, he would have to deduct money from his pocket money to buy a new set. So after the last fight, he had enchanted all the clothes he was wearing when he got home. It was precisely because of this that his clothes weren't torn to shreds by the two enormous forces tearing at him from above and below as he stood in the void boundary. On the other hand, he was facing a familiar opponent. President Bai also summed up the lesson learned from last time. Before he became ethereal, his self-healing ability was his greatest trump card. Therefore, before the battle began, he had decided on a strategy of attrition. He planned to exhaust the youth's stamina before launching a counterattack. But young President Bai didn't know that even the most basic slap from the youngster had the effect of heavily injuring him. When he was slapped, he didn't even have the strength to fight back. Therefore, in this battle, after he evolved into White Void, he came up with a new strategy, which was to use his advantage as a void creature to suppress the enemy with firepower. Void creatures didn't need to worry about spirit energy consumption. Their energy source came from the void, and the void's energy source was inexhaustible. At that moment, the two of them stood alone in the void boundary. After looking at each other for a few seconds, they each had their own thoughts. Grasping his cane, White Void raised his sleeves, and an endless mass of void energy appeared in the void. These energy masses of various sizes appeared almost instantaneously around Wang Ling like the giant abyssal mouth of a prehistoric beast, and he was instantly surrounded so tightly that not even a drop of water could escape. For a moment, Wang Ling felt like he was trapped in an ocean ball. Wang Ling opened his king's eye, and the three-petaled golden lotus in his eyes bloomed, giving his pupils the color of a black hole. A tremendous devouring ability began to manifest. At that moment, Wang Ling's king's eye turned into the mouth of a giant beast, which sucked in all the energy nearby. In the face of such a dense mass of void energy, this was the best solution Wang Ling could come up with. If he forcibly destroyed it, even the aftershock from the explosion would be enough to destroy Songhai City. Casually dispelling his move, White Void's mind went blank again, just like the last time. He had already become a more advanced life form. Perhaps even White Void himself didn't realize it, but fine sweat had already started to trickle down his forehead. The other party could actually absorb all of his void energy with just his strength? No. That was impossible. At that moment, White Void turned his cane again in disbelief. He had an inexhaustible supply of void energy, and he didn't believe that Wang Ling could devour his energy endlessly, so troublesome. On the other side, Wang Ling could only repeat what he had done last time, and use the king's eye to absorb the energy again. Although Su Bai was overly conceited, he had actually guessed one thing correctly, and that was that the king's eye's capacity was in fact limited, and it was impossible for it to absorb energy endlessly. Once the space was full, Wang Ling had to find a way to release the energy stored in the king's eye. But at this rate, it would actually take a long time for it to be full. Bored to death, Wang Ling stood in the middle of the field and watched White Void's boring performance. After observing for a while, he was already a little impatient. Thinking of the online classes he had to take tomorrow, Wang Ling's heart was instantly filled with complicated emotions. This was the so-called suspension of classes didn't stop. Even if Wang Ling was at home, he still had to take online classes. Not only that, the school had also stipulated that every student had to record a learning video and send it to the class group. This undoubtedly added a lot of trouble to Wang Ling. This way, he couldn't let the two gremlins pen and eraser do his homework for him. And wasn't the main culprit behind why he was stuck at home taking online classes because of this White Void standing in front of him? As the saying went, every debt had its debtor. In that instant, Wang Ling, who had to take online classes the next day, could no longer suppress his urge to slap White Void to death. Like the last time, he walked toward White Void step by step. But compared with the last time, White Void had indeed become stronger. Wang Ling couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't be able to directly kill him with one slap. But he still walked up to White Void and raised his hand. White Void sneered. "All physical attacks are useless against me. The moment your slap hits me, it will be completely swallowed up by the void." Slap. In the next moment, a solid slap landed on White Void's face. White Void's head was completely detached from his body and disappeared. This was just an ordinary slap. But it didn't seem to have achieved the effect that Wang Ling had hoped for. He sensed that White Void's aura hadn't completely disappeared. Sure enough, in the next moment, White Void's head grew back. Wang Ling understood what was going on at this scene. It turned out that the head wasn't a vital point. It looked like he would have to change his next slap. The error-free chapter of the daily life of the Immortal King will continue to be updated on Green Bean. There are no advertisements on the site, so please bookmark and recommend Green Bean. If you like the daily life of the Immortal King, please bookmark. The daily life of the Immortal King Green Bean updates the fastest. Chapter 1259. The moment Wang Ling's palm touched Su Bai's cheek, the warm and familiar touch instantly passed through the pores of Su Bai's face. Had the swallowing of the void failed? The moment he felt the pain, Su Bai asked this question in his heart. In fact, this wasn't the result of Su Bai's swallowing failure. Based on Wang Ling's current understanding of void creatures, the swallowing effect did indeed block all physical attacks and even magic attacks. However, Su Bai had missed out on something. That was when Wang Ling didn't use magic attacks. All of his normal attacks, including the slaps, were all true damage. So it wasn't that the swallowing of the void had failed. But from the very beginning, Su Bai had been too confident in his abilities as a void creature. But compared with the previous few battles, Wang Ling had to praise President Bai for being a lot steadier in his style. Su Bai hadn't been able to kill the other party with this slap because President Bai had left something up his sleeve. This was another ability that Wang Ling had never seen on other void creatures. Su Bai called it Void Redemption. There was an inexhaustible source of energy behind the void gate, and this move drew on the power of the void behind the gate to reconstruct the damaged part of the body when it suffered a fatal blow. Before coming here, Subai had been extremely confident in his chances of winning this battle. But he had still left something up his sleeve, and had used the power of the void to customize a lot of human organs in advance so that he could transfer them to Wang Ling at any time. Unfortunately, because of his confidence in this battle, Subai had only prepared a backup plan, and didn't have too many. He had calculated that if Wang Ling fought him, Wang Ling might slap him in the face, so he had prepared 5 heads in advance to replace them. Now, there were only 4 left, but judging from the youngster's stance, it seemed that the other party had already lost interest in Subai's face and was going to hit somewhere else. It wasn't that he didn't have any other body parts, but he didn't have as many as the heads. How many times had it been? Was he going to fail again? Subai couldn't help lamenting in his heart as he sensed the obvious gap in strength between them. He had clearly given up on his mortal human body and evolved into a higher creature. Why? Why couldn't he beat this youngster? At that moment, Subai gripped his cane tightly, his palms already sweating. He had no other choice. He could only pray for the Void Master's help. The next moment, White Hollow's body began to change. He was trying to turn his body into a hollow spirit. That way, he would be able to control his body freely and teleport to wherever he wanted. Even if Wang Ling's slap could hit him, whether or not he could catch him was still a question. However, what shocked Subai was that, just as his body was about to transform, he was stunned by a terrifying suction force. Wang Ling's eyes again. That pair of eyes that seemed to be able to see through everything, penetrate the eternal night, and see through the boundless universe. The terrifying power of suction had the power to separate the false from the true. Subai's body froze on the spot. No form existed in front of the king's eye. In fact, all of this was Subai's own doing. He had become an ethereal. However, in order to sneak into the human world, he invaded someone else's body. Perhaps he was plotting his own grand plan. But as an ethereal, they had already become superior creatures without a physical body. Invading a human's body again and merging with it was an act of lowering their status. Subai had thought that he could freely switch between a human and an ethereal body. But he had miscalculated again. The power of the king's eye. Damn it, it shouldn't be like this, it shouldn't be like this. Subai's heart began to break down. Every time this youngster dealt with him, he would come up with some new tricks that Subai didn't even know about. Each time, he didn't have the most comprehensive information. It was as if he was forever one step behind the youngster in front of him. The king's eye wasn't part of Tao. Wang Ling had only learned this secret not long ago. So even if Subai realized how powerful the king's eye was, there was no way he could deal with it. His eyes were probably the hardest things in the universe. There was no power that could pierce through them. Thus, Wang Ling wasn't worried at all about exposing the king's eye in front of Subai. Besides, would there be a next time? Wang Ling didn't believe that Subai could come back to life after this battle with another identity. At that moment, Subai, whose form was restricted by the king's eye, felt a deep stabbing pain in his soul. On the other side, Wang Ling wasn't going to give Subai any chance to think at all. His second palm was aimed at Subai's crotch, and he directly smashed the lower half of Subai's body, which was also an extremely fatal part. Wang Ling. Don't look down on me. The battle isn't over yet. Subai suddenly roared at that moment. There was unwillingness and anger in this roar, but Wang Ling felt that it was more likely a sense of despair after a broken jar. Subai didn't have many organs left in his other body parts. Subai swiftly reacted to Wang Ling's second palm strike. Before Wang Ling's palm landed, he swiftly turned his face toward Wang Ling. Wang Ling marveled at Subai's operation. He had actually taken the initiative to use his face to block the knife for the other parts of his body, and so, after the second palm, he knew that there were only 3 white skulls left in his inventory. After his head was restored, Wang Ling realized that Subai was actually smiling at him. Wang Ling had clearly destroyed Subai twice already, but the other party was actually smiling like a victor. I never thought that I, Subai, would would actually be able to withstand your second blow. Su Bai's words were laced with a deep sense of mockery. In Wang Ling's opinion, this person was probably already crazy. From the very beginning, Su Bai had stood in front of Wang Ling confidently, confident in his victory, and had threatened to kill Wang Ling. But at that moment, Su Bai had completely changed his attitude from before, and actually took pride in blocking as many slaps as he could. What a nerve-wracking and troublesome opponent. Wang Ling evaluated Su Bai in his heart. After a sigh, he sent a third palm strike towards Su Bai. This palm cut into the scorched area very craftily, and Wang Ling felt that this should be enough to end the battle. But just as his palm was about to touch Su Bai's face once again appeared precisely under Wang Ling's palm. Wang Ling, I told you not to look down on me. I've already bet that you'll attack from this angle. I still have 2 heads left. Although I can't beat you, at the very least, I can withstand your 4th palm. At that moment, Su Bai laughed maniacally. In this world, let me ask you, is there anyone who can withstand your 4th palm? Who else? For a moment, Wang Ling couldn't refute him. He felt that this person's head had been beaten out of shape. Chapter 1260. At that moment, Su Bai still had 2 heads left. For Su Bai, these were his last 2 lives. If he could block the next 2 blows, then he might become the man who had been slapped the most by Wang Ling. On the other side, Wang Ling's mood was particularly complicated when he delivered his 4th palm strike. He thought that this was probably how an adult's heart broke down. As a cultivator, had Baizhi worked hard enough? He was afraid so. In pursuit of a higher realm, he had once cultivated painstakingly for 1,000 years. In pursuit of a higher realm, he hadn't hesitated to betray and kill the boss who had supported him. In pursuit of a higher realm, he had even decided not to be human, and had completely dedicated his soul to the void. But what had he gotten in return? Baizhi. At that moment, Wang Ling carefully pondered President Bai's real name. Indeed, in Wang Ling's view, all of this had been a waste of effort. Evil people would be tormented by evil people. In Wang Ling's view, President Bai's fate had actually been decided a long time ago. In history, no matter how high the cultivation level of any cultivator who committed crimes was, their final outcome was not much better. There is reincarnation in heavenly Tao. Who will the heavens spare? This wasn't just a saying. Those cultivators who committed evil deeds would eventually be devoured by the evil deeds they had committed. Wang Ling didn't intend to give Su Bai another chance to deliver a 5th palm strike. His face was still expressionless when he delivered his 4th palm strike. What Su Bai didn't expect was that just as he was calculating which part of his body Wang Ling's palm would land on, Wang Ling's palm, which was about to reach him, instantly became enormous. Like the 5 fingers of a Buddha, his enormous palm blotted out the sky. In an instant, his entire body was covered. Is it all over? At this point, Su Bai realized that this battle was probably going to be over. There was no way he could evade Wang Ling's 4th strike. He had clearly tried so hard, but he already couldn't escape death. It was over. Boom! The palm fell. President Bai, who had challenged Wang Ling again after advancing into Su Bai, was completely destroyed. Wang Ling's 4th palm strike wasn't an ordinary one. He had combined dozens of heavenly Tao spells, and even used Fate Tao and Divine Tao. His physical body and soul had suffered a huge blow. All of this was to ensure that President Bai was completely eliminated and that there was no possibility of him being resurrected. Wang Ling's palm didn't just eliminate President Bai in front of him. Because it had fused with the power of Fate Tao, even President Bai from the other parallel worlds had been completely destroyed. From now on, Baizhi no longer existed in this world. After the battle, Wang Ling sighed to himself. After the incident with President Bai, he felt that he had gained a lot of inspiration. There was nothing wrong with a person working hard to make himself better. However, in order to make oneself better, one must build on the foundation of one's own efforts. Sacrificing the happiness of others to make oneself better was not called hard work, but a sin. Wang Ling sighed. He turned around and prepared to step out of the void boundary. But at that moment, Wang Ling suddenly noticed something he had overlooked. The situation was not as simple as he had imagined. Baizhe had been completely destroyed by him. Regardless of whether he was a church or an earthling, he no longer existed. Logically speaking, after Wang Ling had eliminated Baizhe, the void boundary he was in should have been automatically lifted. But the void boundary in front of him still showed no signs of collapsing. Even after death, can the void boundary still be preserved? Wang Ling was secretly amazed at how troublesome these void creatures were. Fortunately, he had been the one fighting Su Bai just now. If it had been anyone else, even if they had the ability to get rid of Su Bai, Wang Ling might not have been able to get out of this void boundary. So here was the problem in front of Wang Ling now. How to deal with this void boundary was a huge problem. The void boundary was a kind of domain ability of the void creatures. Since it was a domain ability, it definitely had something to do with the world behind the void gate. There's no other way. At that moment, Wang Ling frowned inwardly. If this thing was directly destroyed, it would probably create a very terrifying spatial tide, which would be similar to a black hole swallowing everything up. This would cause massive damage to the city he lived in. For now, Wang Ling's idea was to send this void boundary back to where it belonged. To its own place to go. At that moment, Wang Ling raised his sword fingers and silently recited a spell. In less than a few seconds, a huge teleportation formation was completed. This was one of the branches of the Heavenly Tao spell, Great Transmission spell, Return spell, which could return anything to its original owner, or even the world. Gu Xuanji should be very familiar with this spell. It was one of the spells required to cultivate as a keeper of order, and was usually used mainly to correct some space-time distortions. When space-time distortions took place, the creatures of many worlds would be teleported to and fro. Some people would see strange spirit beasts, vegetation, and even extraterrestrial creatures that had never appeared in their own world. Some of these phenomena might not be an illusion. BZZT. 30 seconds later, the transmission began. It was accompanied by a golden beam of transmission light that pierced the sky. Wang Ling directly disappeared from Songhai City along with the void boundary that Su Bai had left behind. The unknown black ball of spirit power in number 60 high has disappeared. At that moment, a police officer who had been evacuating the nearby crowd said in a frightened voice. With the void boundary gone, that tremendous sense of oppression also disappeared. The crisis had been averted. Some of the police officers hugged each other, while others directly collapsed to the ground in exhaustion. Although the pressure inside Su Bai's void boundary was the greatest, the pressure radiating from the outside was still very strong. Golden core cultivators working in such an environment could have a nervous breakdown at any time. But the more dangerous it was, the more they had to step forward. This was their duty. It was also their mission to protect the lives and property of all cultivators. Good job, everyone. Good job, everyone who went against the flow. As the temporary commander, Zhuo encouraged all the police officers who had bravely stepped forward. Looking in the direction of number 60 high school, which had already been completely reduced to ruins, he felt a little complicated. It had already been completely demolished. It looked like the construction team would be able to move in tomorrow and build a new school building, a new sports field, a new gymnasium, and the newest spirit gathering array. But Zhuo was also a little puzzled. The void boundary had indeed disappeared. Where had his Shifu gone? Meanwhile, elsewhere. When Wang Ling opened his eyes, he was already in a world full of light. This is... Wang Ling looked around expressionlessly. If his guess was right, he had probably been teleported along with the void boundary. Both of them had been teleported back to the world of the void. Was it you who killed Su Bai? At that moment, a deep and hollow voice rang out in the world. You are? Wang Ling had no respect at all. I am your great master of the void, the voice replied. Wang Ling. Chapter 1261. The world of the void wasn't too different from what he had imagined. It was somewhat similar to the God realm, but there were differences. The god world was also a glorious and beautiful scene. However, the only difference from the void world was that it had dense vegetation. Gods, when they had nothing better to do, liked to take care of some flowers and plants. Actually, this was very normal. However, there was nothing in the void world. It could almost be described as a blank space. Wang Ling recalled what the Sun Spirit had said to him before. Behind the void gate is nothing but emptiness. Now, Wang Ling suddenly understood what on earth this meant. He could sense that there were countless ethereal spirits floating around in the air, invisible to the naked eye. They were like mayflies in the depths of the sea. Even though they were densely packed, they seemed unusually small in comparison to the entire world. This is the void world. How is it? Are you tempted? At that moment, the Lord of the Void's words interrupted his train of thought. Wang Ling wasn't in a hurry to act. Even though the Void Master's tone made him feel uncomfortable, he didn't care. What was more, it had never been in his nature to make the first move. Never make the first move. This was one of the rules of the Cathayan military. After all, they had only just met, and the other party had not done anything to him. It seemed a little too overbearing to kill him. Join the Void, become a citizen of the Void, and you will be able to enjoy the taste of the pinnacle. The Void Lord continued, you can enjoy the lives of everyone here. You can even rule over your own world. Wang Ling was puzzled. The Void Master replied, it's mainly about thinking. The minds of the people behind the Void Gate are all connected. This time, Wang Ling understood. It seemed that the spiritual life of the ethereal church was entirely reliant on fantasy. That's a little low. In any case, it was all fantasy. Wouldn't it be better to find a book to read? At this point, he didn't plan to stay any longer. He had thought that the Void Master would be very capable, but it turned out that he was just a king of lust. Wang Ling cast a spell with his hands, intending to use the return spell to bring himself back to his original world. To Wang Ling's surprise, the Lord of the Void had no intention of stopping them. In fact, it was the Void Master who had saved his life. It was just that before Wang Ling left, he left 2 words for him. I know that the imaginary world you think doesn't really exist. But have you ever thought that perhaps living itself is the greatest fantasy? These were the first words the Lord of the Void had left Wang Ling. Then, he said, you've indeed killed White Void. The emptiness of the real world no longer existed. But this king wants to remind you that the emptiness in your imagination. You will never be able to destroy it. As soon as he finished speaking, Wang Ling's figure completely disappeared from the world of nothingness. After a few more minutes, the Void Lord's voice came from the silent void world again. What a shocking power! It took him a few minutes to compose himself. There was a reason why Su Bai lost. Even the Master of the Void was afraid of this terrifying pressure. I am your great Master of the Void, he had said at the very beginning. In fact, when the Void Lord said this, he already knew. After saying that, there was a 50% chance that the youth in front of him would slap him to death. But for the sake of his dignity as a king, the Void Master braced himself and tried. Luckily, Wang Ling wasn't angered by what he had said. At that time, the Void Master had sighed in his heart. After all, this was a man who had undergone 9 years of compulsory education. His character was indeed different. Great Lord, are we just going to let him go like this? At that moment, the voices of the other spirits came from the side. That's all I have to say. That's enough. The Void Master shook his head. The truth was clear. There was nothing he could do to stop Wang Ling from leaving. Furthermore, the Void Master knew very well. There was only one person who could ignore the Void Gate and freely enter and exit the Void World by himself. It wasn't wrong for White Void to die at the hands of such a person. Are we going to be defeated? Nearby, many ethereal beings asked. The last 2 sentences I left him said it all. The Void Master was silent for a moment, then said, we can't stop White Void from dying, nor can we stop him from obstructing our operation. At this point, it seemed that the plan to invade the Void had completely failed with White Void's death. But just as all the spirits were feeling disappointed, the Void Master said, "Failure is only temporary. Even if we can't find the Son of the Void in the short term, they will eventually become citizens of the Void and return to the Void," after Wang Ling returned from the world of the Void. The ethereal spirits that had already invaded the human body began to leave the human body in various forms. Perhaps they were still wandering around Earth and couldn't return to the world of the Void. But Wang Ling knew that this was the Void Master's way of showing weakness. He remembered what the Void Master had told him before he had left the world of the Void. Wang Ling couldn't help but ponder the profound meaning behind these words. White void in the fantasy world. For some reason, Wang Ling had a bad feeling about this. He used the many great Tao in his body to sense it, and once again confirmed that white void had completely disappeared. In this world and other worlds, the emptiness of all the worlds no longer existed. But Wang Ling was particularly concerned about the Void Master's words. When he got home, it was already the early morning of Friday, the 25th, Wang Ling received a message from Audiobook. Shifu, the cultivators who were diagnosed as having been invaded by the spirits have really returned to normal. As expected of Shifu. This time, it could be said that the creatures of the void have been completely defeated. Also, you don't have to worry about number 60 high school. The construction team will arrive this morning, and the construction will be completed in 3 days. Classes will start next Monday. Wang Ling was extremely calm when he read this message. There was no doubt that Audiobook had rendered meritorious service again. In the future, Audiobook's personal achievements would be added to the list. History would call it the night of 112,660 high school's demolition. Following the retreat of the creatures of the void, the tense situation at the headquarters also subsided, and grenade-throwing senior immortal was released. Later, Wang Ling heard that General Yi had indeed been invaded by the creatures of the void. Fortunately, the spirits had retreated in time, allowing General Yi to return to normal. If they had been any later, the head of state might have already given the order to kill them. Everything seemed to have been resolved satisfactorily. But Wang Ling still felt that he had missed something. That morning, Wang Ling received a message from the class group chat. It was said that Lotus Sun had suddenly fallen seriously ill. Furthermore, she had already been sent to the ICU. The error-free chapter of the daily life of the Immortal King will continue to be updated on Green Bean. There are no advertisements on the site, so please bookmark and recommend Green Bean. If you like the daily life of the Immortal King, please bookmark the daily life of the Immortal King. Green Bean updates the fastest. Chapter 1262. It was Heartwarming who first told him about it. Perhaps he had received some intelligence from one of his uncles, but he was extremely worried about her current situation. Then, as Wang Ling had expected, the class group exploded. Super Chin, what kind of feeling is this? Wasn't everything fine before? Heartwarming, Super Chin, don't talk, I'm scared. Super Chin, Su Xiao, it's strange. I just checked the lecture notes with Sun classmate yesterday. Her face was very good. He doesn't look sick at all. Heartwarming, I can't say for sure. My uncle said that Huagua Water Curtain Group organized an expert consultation last night, and all the famous doctors in Songhai City who were free were invited. Some doctors have just retired from the epidemic prevention station, and they rushed over as soon as they received the application. Do you have any specific information? What kind of illness is it? In the class chat group, everyone was very worried. They couldn't help with anything else, but with Huagua Water Curtain Group's financial resources, they probably wouldn't be short of money. The only thing he could do was to pray. At that moment, Heartwarming frowned and typed again, strange, that's the strange part. I heard that more than a dozen experts have already examined her, but they still haven't figured out what's wrong with her. The comments in the class group made Wang Ling frown deeply. After the 9 Dragon Mountain competition, he had visited Lotus Sun as a representative. He even secretly examined Lotus Sun's body. There were no obvious abnormalities on his body. There was no curse of the Enyang death tribulation that Old Man Sun was worried about. Now, as soon as the void retreated, Lotus Sun fell seriously ill. Wang Ling felt that there was something very fishy about the whole thing. Now, can the Son of the Void lock onto the area? Wang Ling asked Book of Sage Immortal. After he returned from the Void World, Book of Sage Immortal had also obtained more data and information. At present, he had successfully reduced the scope. As Wang Ling had expected, Lotus Sun was the child of the void. On the boy's side, there were still 2 pairs of them. The probability of winning was about the same. One was the secretary of Huaguo Water Curtain Group, Jiang Xiaoche, and the other was General Yi's adopted son, Yi Jiang. Both of them are currently at 50%. Wang Ling knew very well that if Lotus Sun's current illness had something to do with the evacuation of the void, no matter which one of them was the son of the void, it was possible that one of them would suffer from the same illness at the same time. But the result was different from what he had imagined. According to the results of Book of Sage Immortal's investigation, at the moment, Jiang Xiaoche was still fine. Although Yi Jiang was indeed in the hospital, the main purpose of his hospitalization was psychological counseling, and he wasn't suffering from a life-threatening, serious illness, like Lotus Sunday. There's no other way. At that moment, Wang Ling sighed slightly in his heart. He felt that the whole story was not that simple. There was something strange about Lotus Sun's illness. He had to trace it back to the source. Otherwise, even if Wang Ling cast a spell to save him, it would only be a matter of time. Therefore, before the results of the investigation were out, he could only do his best to help Lotus Sun stall for time. After all, they were classmates. Moreover, it was only a slight effort on his part. Then, he opened the cabinet next to him and prepared to draw talisman paper himself. Come and help. Wang Ling looked at Loopy Toad. Loopy Toad walked over, turned into its human form, and started to cut the talisman paper according to Wang Ling's instructions. What talisman are you drawing? Death Substitute Talisman, said Wang Ling. Loopy Toad nodded. This was a type of talisman that was similar to a resurrection coin. It could be activated at a critical moment to save a person's life. But if an ordinary Dao cultivator wanted to draw a death substitute talisman like this, apart from consuming a huge amount of spirit power, it would also take decades or even centuries of hard work before one could be developed. A talisman like this could be casually drawn and directly mass-produced. Wang Ling was the only one in the world. His young master Ling was too heaven-defying. If an ordinary person were to see this scene, they would definitely be horrified. But Loopy Toad was different. Because Wang Ling had shocked it so much that it was already numb to it. It went without saying how powerful the death substitute talisman that Wang Ling had drawn himself was. If Lotus Sun really suffered a fatal injury, this talisman would not only capture her soul, it would also help her recover from her physical injuries. All morning, the gremlins in the Wang family's small villa were mobilized. Using limited materials, they drew 3,000 death substitute talismans. It was close to noon. These 3,000 death substitute talismans had already started to take effect, and 2 had been burned. As Wang Ling had expected, there was indeed something strange about this illness. In a normal situation, even if it was an incurable disease, as long as the death substitute talisman that Wang Ling had drawn himself was present, there was no doubt that she would survive. There was no need for a second talisman at all. Wang Ling observed that the time between the 2 death substitute talismans was about an hour. One had to be burned in an hour? Wang Ling frowned deeply. He was even more certain now. This definitely wasn't an illness. Instead, someone with ulterior motives was cursing behind his back. Furthermore, the person behind this was probably very cunning. Wang Ling stayed at home for a while longer. He observed the consumption of the death substitute talismans. At around 2:00 in the afternoon, the bad news came again. Wang Ling noticed that the rate at which the death substitute talismans burned was increasing. Previously, 1 talisman had been used every hour, but now it was used every 50 minutes. Looking at this growth rate, the consumption of the death substitute talismans would only get faster and faster. This was the reason why he had stayed at home to observe. There was actually a curse in this world that could adapt to his death substitute talismans? Wang Ling was utterly astonished. It seemed that for the time being, he couldn't get away to investigate the matter in detail. He had to draw the death substitute talismans himself. Otherwise, Lotus Sun's life would be in danger. Wang Ling quickly called Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal. One was to have Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal go to the hospital on his behalf to investigate the situation. Wang Ling still had a king's eye in Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's hands, so even if he didn't go there himself, he might still be able to find some clues. The second thing was to have Battle's sect provide him with the materials to make the talismans. Although Wang Ling could mass-produce the death substitute talismans, the consumption of materials was enormous. Wang Ling had already used up all the stock in his drawer. Furthermore, the materials he had bought were the cheapest ones on the market. With Battle's sect's resources, the higher the quality of the materials, the higher the strength of the talismans would naturally be. Brother Ling, should I give my soul suppression ring to classmate Lotus Sun? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal suddenly asked. No, that won't work, Wang Ling replied. Although the soul suppression ring also had the effect of resurrection, it couldn't be used in a situation where someone was cursed to death. To trigger the soul suppression ring's effect, the person's body had to be fatally injured. He couldn't just give the ring to Lotus Sun, and then send an executioner to stab her when he saw that she was about to die, so that she would be stabbed and come back to life at the same time. That was too cruel. Will he eventually return to the void? After the call with Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, Wang Ling recalled what the Lord of the Void had said. These words didn't provoke Wang Ling. Instead, he felt a little excited. In fact, he was a little excited. It looked like the Lord of the Void was challenging him. In all his years, this was the first time that a creature had questioned his ability. The Lord of the Void thought that he didn't have the ability to stop the Son of the Void from returning to the Void world. But it was still unknown who would emerge victorious. Chapter 1263. As it turned out, Heartwarming's intelligence wasn't exaggerated at all. Shanghai City's 7 stars first military medical hospital. All the big shots in the country had gathered together. Old Man Sun used almost all of his connections to help him. Within Shanghai City alone, the first group of 17 experts had quickly assembled. These were all eminent figures in the cultivation medical world. Outside Shanghai City, even more experts from other places had been invited. Anyone who had time on their hands was called. That night, Old Man Sun mobilized 20 private immortal warships under the group to be responsible for picking up experts from other cities. The commotion was so great that it could be said to be unprecedented. In the conference room on the top floor, an image was projected on a big screen. On the left was Lotus Sun lying in a medical cabin. The girl's face was rosy and her eyes were closed quietly. She looked very peaceful and didn't look sick at all. On the right side of the screen were real-time monitoring data from the medical cabin and the results of a scan of her body's environment. The experts in the room frowned and pushed up their glasses as they stared intently at the densely packed data panels in front of them. Sitting in the center of the conference room, Old Man Sun crossed his fingers nervously. All of you are eminent figures in the medical world. What do you think about my granddaughter's condition? In just one night, Old Man Sun seemed to have aged a lot. He had just mobilized his family's power to help the front line investigate the Void invasion. Who would have thought that after the Void incident, another wave would arise before the first wave had even subsided? Next to him, Lu Ping, the director of the military hospital, said, "Everyone has seen her current situation. Miss Sun has no obvious external or internal injuries, her complexion is calm, and her breathing is smooth. However, for some reason, Miss Sun's heartbeat and brainwave activity have stopped abnormally, and then gradually recovered. At first, the episodes occurred once an hour, but now the intervals are getting shorter and shorter. Based on the current data, Miss Sun may be suffering from a neurological disease." At that moment, Director Lu Ping turned his gaze to an old doctor with grizzled hair and beard and a mustache on his chin. "Dr. Zhao, you are the country's expert on neurology. Back then, a soul formation cultivator and a foundation establishment cultivator fell in love. In the end, because of the difference in strength, the soul formation expert used too much force when they kissed. He sucked the tongue out of that foundation establishment female cultivator's mouth. If it weren't for Dr. Zhao connecting her nerves and turning the tide, this female cultivator would have lost her tongue forever. Why don't you tell me what you think about this illness? Dr. Zhao twirled the pen in his hand and shook his head helplessly. I've already checked Miss Sun's nerves. Everything is stable. He didn't look like a sick person at all. This old man has been practicing medicine for 100 years, but I have never seen such symptoms. Speaking up to this point, Dr. Zhao turned his gaze to a slightly plump female doctor and said, Dr. Qian is a famous gynecological surgeon. Back then, she only used a scalpel to cut into the body of a nascent soul stage cultivator and carried out the fetus that had a physical conflict with the nascent soul in the womb of the female cultivator. I wonder, from the perspective of a gynecologist, what does Dr. Qian think of this matter? There's no need to mention what happened back then. Dr. Qian smiled modestly. I've already fully understood Miss Sun's situation, and I believe that Miss Sun's illness is not a gynecological disease. Over the years, I've come across thousands of strange gynecological cases, but that's all because the female cultivator's lifestyle isn't clean. Miss Sun has always been clean, which is all the more reason to rule out the possibility of a gynecological disease. The female doctor surnamed Xian sighed slightly. At this moment, she looked at Old Man Sunday. I wonder if Mr. Sun is hiding something from us? Hearing this, Old Man Sun's pupils contracted. He was indeed hiding something about the yin and yang death tribulation. Back when he had taken Lotus Sun to the hospital for a checkup after the 9 Dragon Mountain competition, he had already looked for countless diviners to calculate the curse. However, none of them had divined that Lotus Sun had been cursed, but if this had something to do with the yin and yang death tribulation, then the only way was to find the person who had cursed her and solve the problem at its root. On the other hand, if he were to reveal everything here and word of this were to spread, then it would undoubtedly alert the enemy. Old Man Sun couldn't imagine the consequences at all. While he was in a daze, Jiang Shaoche suddenly whispered in his ear, Sir, Grenade-throwing senior immortal requests an audience. He's already waiting in the other conference room. Got it, I'll go right away. Old Man Sun nodded. I'm very sorry, everyone. Then, Old Man Sun stood up and bowed deeply to all the doctors. I'll have to trouble everyone to find out the cause and save my granddaughter. Getting up and leaving the conference room, Old Man Sun's expression was clearly a little melancholy. He didn't know if he had been right to hide the yin and yang death tribulation. He also didn't know if Grenade-throwing senior immortal could help him turn things around. Although he hadn't found any evidence, he still firmly believed that this matter definitely had something to do with the yin and yang death tribulation. Mr. Sun, please wait a moment. Just as Old Man Sun was about to go see Grenade-throwing senior immortal, a female doctor walked quickly out of conference room number 1. Old Man Sun glanced at the identity nameplate on the female doctor's chest and saw the word Lu Min written on it. He instantly recalled this female doctor's background. He remembered that this Dr. Lu Min was an expert in the respiratory department. Dr. Lu, is there anything you want to say? Old Man Sun asked. I don't think this matter can be resolved from a medical point of view. Dr. Lu said, I'll make a long story short. More than 10 years ago, I treated a boy who also had a fever for some unknown reason, and it didn't subside. But I couldn't find any symptoms. I began to suspect that someone might have put a curse on him. But the experts in the Department of Curse Dispelling already examined him, and they also couldn't find any problems. Old Man Sun's haggard face showed some despair. There are all sorts of strange curses, and even experts might not be able to identify the most powerful ones. Take that boy who came to see me back then as an example. At that time, our hospital didn't have a Department of Curse Dispelling, but later on, at my recommendation, this matter was resolved appropriately, said Dr. Lu Min. How? I wonder if Mr. Sun has ever heard of a Buddhist monk named Jin Dang? P.S. For a previous review of Zen Master Jin Dang, please see Chapter 968, The Origin of Super Chen's Blessed Mouth. Chapter 1264. Songhai City, 7 stars first military medical hospital. Grenade-throwing senior immortal and old man's son were in the middle of a secret discussion. After the Void Invasion incident, the relationship between Huagua Water Curtain Group and the Battles sect had also become closer. With your strength, did you see anything wrong with my granddaughter? Old man's son asked hopefully. Perfected Lord is already the #1 perfected Lord in the world, and your strength is extraordinary. If even perfected Lord is helpless, I really can't think of anyone else who can help me. Grenade-throwing senior immortal smiled bitterly in his heart. With his meager strength, he probably wouldn't even be able to withstand 2 palms from Brother Ling. No, even 2 palms were considered too much. 1 palm, but he had an agreement with Wang Ling to never divulge his identity. So he wouldn't mention anything about Wang Ling in front of Sun Yiyuan. In grenade-throwing senior immortal's opinion, Lotus Sun would definitely get better. Even if someone had cursed her, the person standing behind her now was the strongest man in the universe. Miss Sun's symptoms are indeed strange. I didn't notice anything unusual. Grenade-throwing senior immortal shook his head slightly in response to this question. Before he had decided to meet Sun Yiyuan, he had already used Wang Ling's King's Eye to investigate him. The King's Eye didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. He even used his eye cleansing ability. If he was really cursed, there was no curse in the world that could avoid the purification effect of the eye cleansing. Grenade-throwing senior immortal had already seen the power of eye cleansing when Kyoan had been arrested by First Prison of Songhai. The curse power of the 7 perfected immortals was disintegrated completely in an instant. Looks like we have no choice but to try everything we can. Old man's son frowned. He thought of the Master Jin Deng that Dr. Lu Min had recommended to him, but he didn't know if this person was reliable. Immortal, have you ever heard of a Buddhist monk named Golden Lamp? Old man's son asked. Never heard of him. Grenade-throwing senior immortal shook his head. A Dr. Lu recommended this old Zen master, saying that this old Zen master might be able to cure my Rongrong's illness. There's no other way right now. Maybe we can try. Grenade-throwing senior immortal nodded slightly. But I have another question. That is related to the yin-yang death calamity. Hearing this, Sun Yiyuan's pupils shook. How did you know about this? Mr. Sun, don't worry. I'm the only one who knows about this. If my venerable self didn't even know about this, then wouldn't I, the #1 true venerated in the world, be a slacker? Grenade-throwing senior immortal laughed self-deprecatingly. Because he indeed seemed to be a slacker. Ever since he had followed Wang Ling, he had been able to do everything. Otherwise, according to the normal cultivation process, he would need a long time to develop. In fact, it was Wang Ling who had told him about the yin and yang death tribulation. Grenade-throwing senior immortal, I just want to ask, where is the senior who deduced the yin and yang death tribulation now? The one who started the trouble should untie it. Maybe he has a solution for Miss Sun's matter. There's no other way. Old man's son shook his head helplessly. As far as I know, this person is no longer in this world. He's actually not in this world anymore. Grenade-throwing senior immortal was astonished. If it was someone who had died recently, perhaps Wang Ling could use a resurrection spell to directly turn them into impure earth reincarnation. For example, Warden Liang had already been rescued after the incident in the void. But now, it sounded like that senior who had done the fortune-telling had probably passed away a long time ago, and even his ashes were nowhere to be found. In this case, the resurrection spell wouldn't be able to pinpoint a specific person, so it was completely useless. At that moment, Sun Yiyuan looked at grenade-throwing senior immortal. I still have to receive experts from other cities in the hospital. So, this old man has a presumptuous request. Grenade-throwing senior immortal instantly understood. I know what Mr. Sun wants to say. Does this venerable self want to find out the truth about that Zen Master Golden Lamp? Exactly. Sun Yiyuan bowed. Don't worry, Mr. Sun, this venerable self will do everything I can, grenade-throwing senior immortal promised. Good. Old man's son was exceptionally moved. Senior immortal, don't call me Mister from now on, let's call each other brothers. I'll leave everything to you, Brother Grenade Throwing. Brother Sun, rest assured, just say the word, and I'll do it, Grenade Throwing Senior Immortal said with cupped fists. He was very clear. This wasn't just helping Sun Yiyuan, it was actually also helping Wang Ling. In order to save Lotus Sun's life, this brother Ling of his had been working non-stop since this morning. Without further ado, Grenade Throwing Senior Immortal decided to set out immediately. This was a race against time. The death substitute talismans were being consumed faster and faster. If things were allowed to continue like this, in the end, it might become 1 talisman per second. Elsewhere, in the Wang family's small villa, Wang Ling mechanically drew talismans. One by one, the death substitute talismans were swiftly produced and placed neatly on one side. These death substitute talismans were consumed over time in the order in which they were produced. The table, the floor and the bed were all piled up with death substitute talismans. All the gremlins in the Wang family's small villa had been mobilized. Lord Ma was responsible for the remote transmission of the talisman paper, while Pillow Immortal and Bed Immortal were responsible for maintaining order on the scene and sorting out the talisman paper that had already been drawn. Loopy Toad stared at the man in front of it who was drawing talismans with an intoxicated expression, and was shaken in its heart. Usually, little Master Ling didn't even look this serious when he did his homework. If his level of seriousness was graded, the Wang Ling who was making talismans should have already reached level 4. This was already a very high level. Because the highest was level 5. And level 5 would only appear when this little Master Ling was eating crispy noodle snacks. In fact, Wang Ling's soul was now in an out-of-body state. He had used the muscle memory spell to set up his body so that it would constantly repeat the action of drawing talismans. It was like a human-shaped printer. But this operation required someone to assist on the side. So Loopy Toad couldn't leave at all, because it had to continuously hand talisman paper to Wang Ling. Wang Ling's out-of-body soul came to the Heavenly Tao Governing Committee. Because he wanted to find someone. Before he could officially enter the Heavenly Tao conference room, the table god inside was instantly terrified. F***K. He's here again. The last time, this man had only asked, "Where is the Heavenly Tao?" 3 times, and the entire Heavenly Tao conference table had been flipped over. Now that he was in the Heavenly Court again, it was clear that he didn't come with good intentions. "Everyone, I'll be leaving first." The table god had a bad premonition and slipped away again, for fear that Wang Ling would slap him in half. The rest of the Heavenly Tao shivered because the scene in front of them was too familiar. What's wrong with him this time? Why is he so angry? Not good. He's coming for me. At that moment, Death Heavenly Tao felt all the hair on his body stand on end. When he came back to his senses, he already felt the man's peach-wood sword against his neck. In a flash, Death Heavenly Tao's head. In an instant, a huge danger word appeared in his mind. Chapter 1265. Death Heavenly Tao felt very aggrieved when Wang Ling put the peach-wood sword to his neck. As one of the 6 main Heavenly Tao, Death Heavenly Tao believed that he had always scrupulously abided by his duty as the main emissary of Heavenly Tao. He was conscientious and conscientious. He even followed the 996 system to work. He didn't even dare complain when he worked overtime. Every time someone died on Earth, he had to remember the person's name and summarize the person's life experience. Then, he would discuss matters regarding the person's reincarnation. Death Heavenly Tao would give the souls of those who had accumulated virtue and done good deeds as soon as possible, and find a good family for them to enter the reincarnation cycle as soon as possible. If they committed all sorts of evil and broke the law, there was a high chance that they wouldn't be able to be human in their next life. Even if they were human, they would start off with a bad start. But Death Heavenly Tao never expected that it would actually be his turn one day to start with a bad start. His heart was as clear as a mirror. If he couldn't quell the anger of the man behind him, he might really split open. At that moment, Death Heavenly Tao was threatened, and the other Heavenly Tao were also trembling. They had seen the power of this peach-wood sword before. If this sword went down, the entire heavenly court might collapse. What on earth is going on? What else could it be? Survival Heavenly Tao winked frantically. While Death Heavenly Tao was at a loss, as a good brother, he already had a general understanding of the situation in the world below. Among the 6 main Heavenly Tao, Life Heavenly Tao and Death Heavenly Tao were the only twin brothers, and were collectively known as Life and Death Heavenly Tao. So, although there were only 6 positions in the main Heavenly Tao, there were in fact 7 people. This was the legendary, there are 7 things in the unseen world. Jinren, don't be angry. Let's talk this over. Death Heavenly Tao was the younger brother. Now that the younger brother was in trouble, Survival Heavenly Tao, as the older brother, naturally had to help smooth things over. He already knew why Wang Ling was so furious. In the end, it was to save a girl. Wang Ling had been drawing death substitute talismans non-stop, and didn't even have time to eat crispy noodle snacks. Quickly, find out what's going on with this Miss Lotus Sun. As Death Heavenly Tao, how can you be so careless and slack off like this? Survival Heavenly Tao winked frantically at Death Heavenly Tao as he reprimanded Wang Ling. The Heavenly Tao little golden men were covered in Dharma light. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to see their expressions, but after spending a long time with each other, they could still tell each other apart. As a pair of twin brothers, there was no doubt that death and survival were connected. Taoist Master, please don't be impatient. I will find out what is going on. Death Heavenly Tao turned around and bowed respectfully to Wang Ling, then took out a strange-looking golden magic ball from his crotch. He gently stroked the magic orb with both hands, and a screen was immediately projected into the void. The screen showed a chat group of the deceased. This was a chat group specially used by Death Heavenly Tao to register the dead. All the souls of the dead were pulled into such a group, and the maximum number of people in each group was 2,000. Death Heavenly Tao was the leader of all the groups. There were more than a few trillion chat groups like this within his jurisdiction alone. Death Heavenly Tao quickly searched for information on Lotus Sunday. In the end, he really did find records related to Lotus Sun in one of the groups he was in charge of. Look, Ling Jinren, these are the chat records, they're all here. Death Heavenly Tao pulled out all the records related to Lotus Sunday. Then, Wang Ling saw what happened after Lotus Sun joined the chat group of the deceased. At around noon on November 27th, system prompt, the new victim, Lotus Sun, has joined the group. When a girl joined the chat group, the other deceased were actually a little excited. Why is it a girl? Ah, she's only 16, so young, what a pity, why did she come here at 16? Everyone in the chat group sighed. They wanted to know more about the girl. Then, the system prompt appeared again. The new victim, Lotus Sun, has left the group. Seeing this, Wang Ling was silent. He speculated that this exit from the group was probably when the first death substitute talisman would officially take effect. Seeing Lotus Sun leave the group, the deceased were collectively shocked. What the hell? She can leave the group? What the hell? She can leave the group after entering? Is she a zombie? What the hell? Why can she leave the group? I want to leave the group too. Boo hoo hoo. A lot of the deceased complained in the group. In this group of 2,000 people, there were always people who had died with regrets because they hadn't fulfilled their wishes. Death Heavenly Tao had set up this group to comfort the souls of the deceased. Its original intention was to calm them down by communicating with each other, sharing their grievances and comparing how miserable they had been. Thus, the specific method of assigning people to the group was based on big data calculations. The death system would constantly add people with even more miserable experiences to the group, thus comforting the souls of the previous person who had joined the group. Lotus Sun, a 16-year-old girl in the prime of her youth, had died for unknown reasons. At such a young age, Death Heavenly Tao's system would naturally determine that she was a very tragic person. Thus, Lotus Sun was pulled into a chat group. Sure enough, after seeing Lotus Sun's age, the deceased who had already joined the group fell silent. Lotus Sun was too young. She was just a 16-year-old girl, but before these deceased could sigh or comfort Lotus Sun, she directly left the group. During that time, there was a brief riot in the group. A lot of the deceased began to think that Lotus Sun had gotten into the group through connections. The deceased reacted violently. But fortunately, Lotus Sun's appearance was just a small interlude, and the matter was soon forgotten. But what the deceased didn't expect was, an hour later, Lotus Sun actually entered the group again. System prompt: the new victim, Lotus Sun, has joined the group. Everyone, what's going on? She entered again? She really woke up in a coffin. What's going on with this girl? She's too weird. Oh my god, has our group lost all our dignity? Wasn't it created by Death Heavenly Tao? The deceased began to wonder about Lotus Sun's identity. But just like an hour ago, before they could ask, the system prompt that Lotus Sun had left the group appeared again. Brother. What's going on? Even Death Heavenly Tao was dumbfounded by this scene. You're Death Heavenly Tao, how would I know what's going on? Life Heavenly Tao put its hand to its forehead. The situation was indeed somewhat beyond their understanding. In less than 24 hours, Lotus Sun had already entered and exited the group more than a dozen times. She herself was fine. This directly broke the morale of the other deceased who had joined the group. No one had ever been able to enter and leave the chat group created by Death Heavenly Tao, and the frequency of the system prompts was getting faster and faster. Death Heavenly Tao speculated that it wouldn't be long before the system prompts flooded the screen. Chapter 1266. Death Heavenly Tao had never thought that the situation would turn out like this. He had been in charge of Death Heavenly Tao for so long, and the only person who could casually enter and exit his chat group of the dead was Tao Ancestor Wang. After Tao Ancestor Wang created them, in order to make his cultivation life more colorful, he would often disguise himself as a man called a Gui and sneak into the chat group of the dead, disguising himself as the dead to communicate with them. By personally experiencing the lives of the dead, he would be able to improve his understanding of the Tao. To put it bluntly, he was just collecting materials. Ling Jinren, this is so strange that even I'm a little confused. Wiping at his sweat, Death Heavenly Tao lowered his head and said, not daring to look Wang Ling in the eye at all. Logically speaking, after a cultivator in the mortal world dies, the Heavenly Tao death system will determine that he or she will be sent to the Heavenly Tao soul vault to collect the soul of the deceased. Finally, according to the system's allocation, the souls of the dead will be pulled into the chat group of the dead. Did those enchanting metal men make a mistake? Hurry up and check it out. You're so careless, yet you're still qualified to be the master of Heavenly Tao? Survival Heavenly Tao berated him. On the surface, he seemed to be reprimanding it, but Survival Heavenly Tao was panicking inside. If the two brothers didn't handle this matter well, their position as Heavenly Axiom Emissary would come to an end. They might even be replaced by the newly promoted Snack Heavenly Axiom. At this moment, the other main Heavenly Taos were all silent. At a time like this, they didn't dare to interfere at all. Every debt had its debtor, so the best choice was to watch silently. Death Heavenly Tao was so nervous that his forehead was covered in sweat. He spun the golden magic ball in his hand and investigated Lotus Sun's soul capture records. The result was once again beyond his expectations. How is this possible? Death Heavenly Tao screamed as if he had seen something terrifying, and his legs went limp. What's going on? Upon seeing this, Survival Heavenly Tao hurriedly placed his hand on the magic ball. When the soul-reaping records appeared in his mind, Survival Heavenly Tao was also shocked. There's no record at all? As soon as he said that, the other Heavenly Tao finally couldn't sit still anymore. This matter was extremely strange. No records? How is that possible? Time Heavenly Tao spoke first. Logically speaking, the little golden man in charge of capturing souls shouldn't have made such a low-level mistake. In that case, without the little soul-luring golden man descending to the mortal world to snatch Lotus Sun's soul, it would be impossible for Lotus Sun to escape. An unimaginable question appeared. Who had stolen Lotus Sun's soul? If her soul had been stolen by an outsider, then how could this person bring her soul into the heavenly Tao soul vault? These questions entangled the other heavenly Taos, causing the surrounding atmosphere to instantly become tense. Now, they thought of something terrifying. That was, the heavenly court, where the heavenly Tao was located, might be being invaded by foreign objects. At this moment, the other emissaries of the main heavenly axiom finally realized the seriousness of the problem. Investigate. We must get to the bottom of this. Strength Heavenly Tao was the first to speak. If the heavenly court is being invaded, we can't refuse. Space, don't you have anything to say? You have surveillance over all the spaces in the heavenly court. Is it an invasion? Space Heavenly Tao frowned. But I don't sense anything out of the ordinary. All the heavenly Tao little golden men are operating in an orderly manner. What's going on? Is there a traitor among us? Strength Heavenly Tao put both hands on the table, then turned its gaze to Soul Heavenly Tao. Soul, you don't sense anything out of the ordinary either? Soul Heavenly Tao sighed slightly. Although I'm Soul Heavenly Tao, I'm not responsible for capturing souls. I only carry out the final judgment and appeal to the souls of those who have committed evil deeds. I don't care about anything else. Wang Ling was also aware of this. Soul Heavenly Tao was more like an arbitrator, and its ability was to interrogate the soul. If those who had made mistakes could withstand the soul interrogation, it proved that they had repented from the bottom of their hearts. This showed that they still had a conscience and still had a chance to turn over a new leaf. For these people, even if they had made mistakes in the past, Soul Heavenly Tao would carry out the final judgment and deal with them leniently based on the results of the soul interrogation. As for those who couldn't withstand the soul interrogation, most of them were sent to animal path. Ling Jinren, as you can see, this matter is very strange. In Heavenly Court, we will definitely thoroughly investigate this matter and find out who on earth is repeatedly seducing Miss Sun's soul, Strength Heavenly Tao said as it bowed to Wang Ling. Then, Wang Ling waited for 10 seconds or so before the 6 main Heavenly Tao members of the Heavenly Tao Governing Committee held a discussion. With Death Heavenly Tao as their representative, they finally gave Wang Ling a preliminary plan. Ling Jinren, how about this? I will personally descend to the mortal world and lie low next to Miss Sunday. If it's one of the Heavenly Tao's little soul-reaping golden men, given my authority, I can definitely stop it easily. Death Heavenly Tao kept wiping at his sweat. Rest assured, Ling Jinren, I'm fully in charge of this matter, and I believe we'll be able to resolve it very soon. As for the life substitute talisman, my elder brother Survival Heavenly Tao will descend to the mortal world to help Ling Jinren draw it. Although my brother's cultivation is far below Ling Jinren's, if he adds his great seal of survival to the life substitute talisman, it can just about match Ling Jinren's duration. The Great Seal of Survival? Wang Ling nodded. He knew the origin of this magic seal. The 6 main Heavenly Tao all had their own exclusive magic weapons which Tao ancestor Wang had specially created back then. These Heavenly Tao magic weapons were even more powerful than world-defying magic weapons, and were astonishingly powerful. Then, we'll do as you say. After thinking for a bit, Wang Ling finally agreed to the plan put forward by the Heavenly Tao Governing Committee. The main thing was that when he heard it, he indeed felt that the whole thing was very strange. The Heavenly Tao little golden man had sent out a soul-reaping envoy. Without any record of it, it had been able to easily seduce Lotus Sun's soul into the Heavenly Tao soul bank. Yet, none of the 6 main Heavenly Tao members of the Heavenly Tao Governing Committee had noticed anything. Yin and Yang death tribulation. What on earth was this thing? Jinren, us 2 brothers are ready. At that moment, the Life and Death Heavenly Tao twin brothers spoke in unison. Wang Ling turned his gaze and saw that they had already put on human skin coats. This was a special disguise used by Heavenly Tao in the mortal world. In essence, they were still little golden men. The human skin cloak they were wearing could completely conceal their Heavenly Tao aura. It was also Tao ancestor Wang's masterpiece back then. His uncanny craftsmanship was truly amazing. At that moment, the 2 Life and Death Heavenly Tao brothers stood in front of Wang Ling. Their human appearance was very young. They were tall and handsome, their eyes were bright and full of expression, and their skin was fair. The two brothers were wearing denim overalls, and they looked like young people. The way to distinguish them was the heavenly Tao golden character between their eyebrows. One life, one death. Apart from Wang Ling, no one else could see the heavenly Tao character between their eyebrows. At that moment, Life Heavenly Tao cupped his fists in a salute and said respectfully to Wang Ling, "Ling Zhenren, we can descend at any time. But we don't have any status in the mortal world at the moment, so we'll need Ling Zhenren's help with this." Wang Ling nodded. This wasn't his first time helping people get IDs. He could leave everything to Audiobook. Chapter 1267. It wasn't rare for Heavenly Tao emissaries to descend to the mortal world. In fact, every year, the Heavenly Tao little golden man would transform into an emissary and enter the mortal world for an inspection. However, these inspections were relatively free. Any Heavenly Tao little golden man could submit an application to the Heavenly Tao governing committee as long as they wanted to, and they could descend to the mortal world after passing the review. The main Heavenly Tao was usually busy with official business, so the number of times it came to the lower realm was relatively less. This time, the Life and Death Heavenly Tao brothers had descended to the lower realms for a single person. This was the first time something like this had happened. Audiobook had already been waiting at the entrance of the Wang family's small villa for a long time. Seeing Death Heavenly Tao come out of the room, Audiobook hurriedly cupped his fists in a salute. "Greetings, Lord Death, I look exactly the same as my brother. With your cultivation level, how did you know it was me?" Death Heavenly Law was very curious. Audiobook said with a beaming face, "It's Shifu, he gave me the authority. It's convenient to receive the two sirs." Authority. Death Heavenly Tao immediately understood. This was probably the effect of the Heaven's Will's great sharing technique. The greater sharing spell had a branch spell called the Knight's Contract. By binding a specific person, the other party could obtain a portion of the spell's power. Now that Audiobook had been sent out by Wang Ling to run errands, Wang Ling had already shared part of the authority over the other king's eye with him. However, this authority was only used to distinguish between the Heavenly Tao of life and death. Audiobook currently had too much strength and too much authority, and it was very easy for his body to overload. He led Death Heavenly Tao to the hospital where Lotus Sun was. Audiobook gave Death Heavenly Tao the identity document he had prepared. "Lord Death, here are your documents." The names on it were Wang Sheng and Wang Si. It was very simple and crude. When the name was recorded, the police officer in charge of registering the identity information was also shocked. The death of the king, there was actually someone who would come up with such an inauspicious name. "I knew people would gossip about my name," Death Heavenly Tao mumbled as he accepted his identification card. He picked up his brother's ID card and threw it out of the window. The ID card immediately turned into a golden light and flew toward Wang Sheng's location. How does Lord Death know what I'm thinking? Nonsense, I am the Heavenly Tao." "Oh, actually, I also think that this name is inauspicious. Even a homophone would be good. But since you've already done it, then forget it." Death Heavenly Law sighed. As the Heavenly Tao of Death, he didn't avoid death at all. In the past, when he was in the lower realms, he used the fake name Wang Si. But after Wang Ling put a sword to his neck this time, Death Heavenly Tao finally felt the fear of death. Naming things was indeed something that needed to be paid attention to. "How's young Miss Sun doing?" Death Heavenly Tao asked. "It's still the same. His illness is recurring. My heart is beating erratically." Audiobook answered truthfully, "There are more than 40 experts gathered in the hospital right now, and they're all discussing countermeasures. If we can't find the reason, what's the point of gathering together? This isn't a team fight." Death Heavenly Tao sat in the front passenger seat and snorted. "I'll be sitting next to Miss Sun's bed later. I'd like to see which lunatic dares to make a move in front of me." Audiobook, the Heavenly Tao cursed, "This should be unprecedented in history. However, it wasn't completely unreasonable for Death Heavenly Tao to be so excited. Audiobook understood this feeling very well. After all, after experiencing the danger of death, people would always have new understandings of themselves. Obviously, it was the same for the Heaven Tao. In a small village on the southern outskirts of Shanghai, a dusty spirit car drove over a bumpy concrete road, kicking up a cloud of dust as it shook violently. At the Nantian Village Spirit Car Station, this old spirit car finally stopped on the side of the road, and a handsome man with waist-length hair got out. Dressed in white and with beautiful hair, it was really grenade-throwing Senior Immortal himself. He didn't dress as grandly as he did in the sect, considering that the person he was going to meet was a Zen monk. Thus, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had specially chosen to dress very plainly. Nantian Village was under air traffic control, and there was a huge shipyard nearby, where countless air immortal warships passed by every day. Given the restriction on flight, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal could only come in a spirit car. Master Jin Deng? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal carefully recalled this Buddhist name and confirmed that he had indeed never heard it before. Given his experience in the cultivation world, if there really was such a reclusive genius, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal felt that he would know about it. Furthermore, he even asked a lot of his good friends on the way. The result was the same: no one had heard of this Buddhist name, Jin Deng. I hope this trip will be fruitful, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal said in his heart. Based on the address that Dr. Lu Min had given him, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal officially entered Nantian Village to look for clues on this Zen master Jin Deng. At the entrance of the village, an old man with a bit of hair on his upper body was playing chess alone. Smoking a cigarette, he was very engrossed in playing 4 roles and playing left and right. From a distance, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal thought he had run into some kind of god. In the end, when he went over to take a look, he saw that this old man was actually playing aeroplane chess by himself. Old man? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal asked tentatively. The old man glanced at grenade-throwing Senior Immortal and replied, "Jungler? It's been a long time since I've been a jungler. My teammates are too weak, and I can't carry them." Helpless, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal could only get straight to the point and ask, "How do I get to Kaiguang Temple?" The old man was furious. "Naked pants? I'm already so old, why would I wear open-crotch pants? Young man, don't make fun of me." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal dropped his forehead into his hand. He hadn't expected to run into an empty-ear maniac as soon as he entered the village. Shaking his head in disappointment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal planned to go into the village and ask the other villagers for clues. Suddenly, the old man's ears seemed to have recovered and said, "If you're going to the Kaiguang Temple, walk straight for 800 meters. The broken house on the right is there." "Thank you, sir." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal cupped his fists and left. Following the instructions of the old man with empty ears at the door, he successfully found the dilapidated house that the old man mentioned. A few of the rivets on the wooden door of the monastery were missing. There was even a gap on the door, through which one could see the situation inside the monastery. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was about to knock. An old voice came from inside. "Your presence brings light to my humble dwelling. The door isn't closed. Please come in and talk." Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was startled by this voice. It seemed that Zen Master Golden Lamp in the temple had long predicted that he would come. In his heart, he marveled at the power of this Zen Master. Just as he was about to push the door open, he felt that the seemingly broken door was actually extremely heavy. He couldn't move it at all with just one hand. At that moment, a chuckle came from inside. "I forgot to tell you, Senior Immortal, you have to push the door a little harder. This door has also been blessed." Chapter 1268. At that moment, grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's astonishment simply couldn't be described in words. He was a true venerated. Although he had reached this realm by eating the heavenly Tao broccoli that Brother Ling had enlightened, his current strength had indeed reached an extraordinary realm. As far as Earth cultivators were concerned, his current battle strength was second only to Immortal Genuine's. However, what surprised him was, he was at the true sovereign realm. Coupled with the hand speed and explosive power that he had accumulated after being single for more than 2,000 years. Using his dominant hand, he was actually unable to move the door of the Kai Guang temple at all. This Zen Master Golden Lamp is indeed extraordinary, grenade-throwing senior immortal said to himself. On the way to the Kai Guang temple, he had always had doubts about the identity of this Master Jin Deng. After all, there were countless swindlers in the pugilistic world these days. And the false believers who swindled money and women in the name of religion were even more rampant. Golden Lamp. It was a Buddhist name that he had never heard of. Grenade-throwing senior immortal had thought that it wasn't a big deal. However, he now realized that he was wrong. Grenade-throwing senior immortal instantly understood that this Kaiguang temple gate was probably this Zen Master Golden Lamp's test for him. If he couldn't enter the temple, then this trip would be in vain. Grenade-throwing senior immortal had no choice but to look serious. He took a deep breath. In the next moment, grenade-throwing senior immortal's palm glowed brightly. The pure blue spirit light was like a layer of coating, firmly wrapping around his palm. Grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't done this casually. Since he was seeking an audience with a Buddhist Zen master, grenade-throwing senior immortal naturally had to show his attitude. The experience he had accumulated from traveling the world and courting death everywhere was of great help to him at this moment. Because of this, even though grenade-throwing senior immortal wasn't a disciple of the Buddhist sect, he could rely on the experience he had accumulated everywhere to display the unique techniques of each sect. And now, grenade-throwing senior immortal was using it. It was the merciful and compassionate palm that he had learned from an eminent Shaolin monk. This was a water element palm technique, and it emphasized on the gentle force of the spring breeze and rain. The seemingly soft palm was extremely bewildering. But when it really landed, it would produce an explosive power. Grenade-throwing senior immortal had already mastered this palm. His palm emitted a nourishing force that was compatible with all living things, causing the flowers and plants in the mud nearby to grow rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. Even the tree in the monastery was affected by the fluctuations of the palm. Its tall branches suddenly grew horizontally and extended out of the monastery. Just as grenade-throwing senior immortal was about to bring down his palm, inside the temple, Zen Master Golden Lamp's voice came again. "Immortal, please come in. I'm afraid the door of my temple will be destroyed if you hit it." "Yes." Grenade-throwing senior immortal bowed at the door and quickly withdrew his palm energy. At the same time, he saw that the gate of the Kaiguang temple was slowly opening. This monastery was very small, and grenade-throwing senior immortal didn't see anyone else. There was a copper incense burner in the middle of the courtyard, which faced the hall of great strength. A monk with a ring scar on his head and wearing an old kasaya was striking a wooden fish inside. "Greetings, Master." Grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't seen Master Jin Deng's true face. Looking at the monk's back from a distance at the threshold, he bowed respectfully with his hands in front of his chest. "You don't have to be so polite, senior immortal. Let's talk inside." Zen Master Golden Lamp smiled. Grenade-throwing senior immortal then stepped through the threshold. In a split second, he felt an immense pressure that made it hard for him to breathe. These floor tiles, grenade-throwing senior immortal realized that the floor tiles he was standing on had probably been blessed by this Zen Master Golden Lamp. But while this pressure was fierce, it didn't stop grenade-throwing senior immortal in his tracks. It was only 20 meters from the door to the Hall of Great Strength. It was a very short yet very far distance. Grenade-throwing senior immortal hadn't expected it to be so difficult. If a true immortal had come here, he probably wouldn't have been able to take a single step. 5 minutes later, grenade-throwing senior immortal arrived at the main hall. With the pressure gone, he felt as if dozens of mountains had been lifted off his shoulders, and he instantly felt relaxed. "Have I passed the master's test?" Grenade-throwing senior immortal asked with a wry smile. The monk in front of him was unexpectedly younger than he had imagined, and didn't have white hair and beard as described in the legends. Grenade-throwing senior immortal found this strange. That Dr. Lu Min had clearly said that Zen Master Golden Lamp was very old. "It's not really a test, because I already knew that Senior Immortal would definitely be able to walk through my atrium. The monk knocked on the wooden fish and said unhurriedly, "The Hall of Great Strength is usually never open to outsiders, and worshippers only light incense in the censer. Won't worshippers feel pressured when they step inside? Their realms aren't high enough, so they won't be able to sense it. On the contrary, the higher their realms, the harder it is for them to walk through the atrium outside the hall." Zen Master Golden Lamp smiled. There are 3,910 floor tiles in this monastery, and each one represents this poor monk's reincarnation. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's eyes widened when he heard this. One floor tile represented one reincarnation. If that was the case, how long on earth had this Zen Master Golden Lamp been alive? Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help thinking of someone. To have such an identity, could he be the ancestor of the Wang family whom Wang Zhen had mentioned, the founder of Heavenly Tao, Tao Ancestor Wang? But this was just Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's guess. He had previously suspected that Tao Ancestor Wang was Wang Ling. But Wang Ling had denied it. Suppressing the shock in his heart, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help asking, "Since Great Master already knew that I would come, do you know why I'm here?" "Of course I do. For the sake of a young lady's life, you were entrusted by someone to spy on me. Please don't blame me, Great Master, Senior Immortal, there's no need to panic." Zen Master Golden Lamp smiled. "I've been spied on countless times in my 1,000 reincarnations, and I'm already used to it. Senior Immortal can already be considered the most polite one. When you open the door, you even know to greet me with my Buddhist palm technique. Great Master, you flatter me. This poor monk has been in this Kaiguang monastery for many years, and has blessed a lot of light for himself as well as for other people. Saving a life is better than building a 7-storied pagoda. As a monk, it's only natural that we do our best to save others." When Zen Master Golden Lamp said this, the hand he used to knock on the wooden fish paused. "But this time, this poor monk has a condition. Great Master, please speak your mind. I want something from Senior Immortal's body." "What is it?" "Your eyes." "My eyes?" Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was startled. "No, the one that someone gave you." Chapter 1269. He actually wanted the king's eye that Brother Ling had left for him. It had to be said that Zen Master Golden Lamp's astonishing words frightened Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal on the spot. He didn't expect the other party to propose such a condition. On one hand, the king's eye wasn't his, so he had no right to make decisions. More importantly, if he really handed over his king's eye, would Zen Master Golden Lamp really be able to do anything about it? One had to know that the strangeness of this matter far surpassed everything that had happened before. Even Brother Ling didn't seem to have an effective solution for the time being. You can discuss this matter with your friend before making a decision. At this time, the rhythmic sound of the wooden fish in the Hall of Great Strength sounded again. Zen Master Golden Lamp closed his eyes slightly, looking like he had nothing on his mind. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's forehead broke out in sweat. Zen Master Golden Lamp was clearly not deliberately pressuring him, but now he was extremely nervous. Grenade-throwing had initially thought that after getting to know Wang Ling, he wouldn't be moved by anything strange that happened in the world. Unexpectedly, the Zen Master Golden Lamp in front of him gave him a great sense of oppression. Moreover, he began to become more and more curious about the identity of this hermit Zen Master who had reincarnated 3,910 times. "My identity will be known to you sooner or later." Zen Master Golden Lamp spoke again. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal realized that his soul shield against mind reading was completely useless in front of this Zen Master Golden Lamp. The monk knocked on the wooden fish. He did not look sideways, but he could clearly tell what he was thinking. "In addition, I want to remind you of one thing." After a long silence in the hall, Zen Master Golden Lamp spoke. "Master, please speak, time waits for no man. I have reincarnated thousands of times, and no one can compete with me in patience. This penniless monk can wait, but that lady can't. Using the death substitution talisman to pay for my life is not a long-term solution." "I understand." Grenade-throwing senior immortal bowed again. Was he really going to give the king's eye away? How was he supposed to tell Brother Ling about this? This became the difficult problem at hand. Elsewhere, Death Heavenly Dao smoothly arrived at the hospital under Aujua's lead. The hospital was heavily guarded, and all the staff were busy. When he arrived at the entrance of the hospital, Death Heavenly Dao had just arrived. Two soul-reaping little golden men sent by Heavenly Dao were supporting a benevolent-looking grandmother over the stairs of the hospital. This was someone who had just passed away from the hospital. From the benevolent smile on the old granny's face, it was obvious that she had passed away peacefully without any worries. This was a man who had died of old age. Death Heavenly Dao could tell at a glance. Moreover, there was a faint layer of magical light on the old granny's body. That was the outer layer formed by the good thoughts of daily life, so that the soul would not suffer the pain of the cold after leaving the body. Of course, no one else was able to see this scene. This was the first time Aujua had seen something like this since he had been granted partial access to the king's eye, and he was amazed. Greetings, Lord Death. The little golden man in charge of capturing souls bowed respectfully when he saw Death Heavenly Dao's human form. They knew that the Heavenly Dao above had already sent two main emissaries to the lower realm to investigate the matter regarding a girl. The Heavenly Dao was shaken. Before this, all the little golden men responsible for capturing souls had gathered and done a head count. In the end, not a single golden man was missing. Everyone was seriously carrying out their work according to their daily schedule. Lord, do you have any leads? Aujua asked as he led Death Heavenly Dao in the direction of Lotus Sun's ICU. Death Heavenly Dao shook his head. To be honest, I'm still confused. I don't know what on earth happened. If only Dao Ancestor was here. Has Dao Ancestor Wang passed away? We've always felt that Dao Ancestor isn't dead. He's just entering his own cycle of reincarnation. But Dao Ancestor has indeed disappeared for too long. It's been 10,000 years since he established Heavenly Court, and there's no trace of him. You can't find him? He guessed that Dao Ancestor didn't want us to find him. Death Heavenly Dao said, I'm telling you all this for Ling Zhenren's sake. If you weren't his disciple, you wouldn't have the right to know. Aujua was alarmed. What on earth is the relationship between my Shifu and Dao Ancestor Wang? Death Heavenly Dao smiled and kept him guessing. I can't say. I understand. Aujua nodded. In his heart, he clearly knew that this might be the legendary heavenly secrets cannot be revealed. After Wang Zhen and this group of people from the domain of the gods had decided to stay on Earth to cultivate, Aujua had learned more about the epic of cultivation. There were some things he could know, but there were also some things that wouldn't do him any good if he knew too much. Aujua was very curious. But he was also a person who knew his place. Death Heavenly Dao had already said this much, so he decided not to ask any more questions. If he had a chance in the future, he believed that his Shifu would tell him himself. Now, he just needed to know that Ling Zhenren was OP. Your Excellency, this is Miss Lotus Sun's ward. A few minutes later, they arrived in front of Lotus Sun's ICU ward. The bodyguards in black from Huagua Water Curtain Group stood in front of the door like two door gods. Sir, I've been entrusted by Senior Immortal to bring a senior to take a look at Miss Sun's condition, Aujua said amiably. He then took out the visitor's pass which he had prepared beforehand from his pocket. Old Man Sun had given it to him, and only internal personnel had it. Please come in. The two bodyguards exchanged glances, then made way for them. Gentlemen, apart from us, was there anyone else who came here today? Aujua asked again before they entered. One of the bodyguards sighed. In addition to grenade-throwing Senior Immortal, there were also several experts who rushed over from other cities. But after taking a look, they all shook their heads and said that the situation wasn't good. I believe Miss Sun will recover. Aujua cupped his fists in salute. The senior I've invited doesn't want anyone to disturb him when he's seeing a patient. Before we come out, please close the door and don't let anyone else in. Don't worry, Director Zhua. The two bodyguards nodded solemnly. They then led Death Heavenly Tao into the ward. Lotus Sun lay quietly in the medical cabin, the young girl's sleeping countenance moving. What a lucky girl, she actually alarmed so many people. Looking at the girl, Audiobook smiled bitterly in his heart. Death Heavenly Tao didn't stand on ceremony, and directly sat down cross-legged. Audiobook asked, Lord Death Heavenly Tao, what do we do next? Death Heavenly Tao crossed his arms with a solemn expression. There's nothing to do, we can only wait. I want to see who on earth did this to her. The consumption rate of the death substitute talismans had already increased to 1 every half an hour. Death Heavenly Tao calculated the time, and had a feeling that it wouldn't be long before Lotus Sun's next soul reaping. About 5 minutes later, the heavy sound of chains came from outside Lotus Sun's intensive care unit. It was a sound that made one's soul involuntarily tremble. Audiobook couldn't stop trembling all over. Your Excellency, this is, don't panic, it's the Soul Reaper. Death Heavenly Tao placed his hand on Audiobook's shoulder to calm him down. At the same time, he was extremely astonished. The Heavenly Tao Soul Reaper little golden men under him were all law enforcement officers. But the malevolent aura outside the ward, where was it coming from? Senior Audiobook? Just then, Audiobook was astonished to hear the girl's voice. The girl, who had been lying quietly, was unexpectedly affected by the chains and forced out of her body. The first thing she saw was Audiobook and a young man in overalls standing next to her bed. Death Heavenly Tao hurriedly reached out and pulled the girl's soul behind him, guarding it like an old hen protecting its chicks. What on earth is going on? The girl was full of puzzlement. Because of the death substitute talisman, every time she was resurrected, she would forget the last time her soul had been taken away. Don't worry, Junior Lotus Sun, I'll explain later. This senior and I are here to save you, Audiobook said as he looked at Lotus Sunday. As soon as he said that, bzzzt. A giant chain with a golden hook directly ignored the door to the ward and pierced through it. It grabbed at the girl's bright and beautiful collarbone. Chapter 1270. The hook, which was full of hostility, tore through the air, and the immense pressure it exuded made one's mind tremble. Startled by the scene in front of her, the girl stood rooted to the spot and didn't dare move half a step. When she saw herself lying in the medical cabin, she immediately had an answer. So I'm already dead? The girl couldn't believe what she was seeing. But how on earth had she died? Lotus Sun couldn't remember any of it. Audiobook immediately broke the girl's wild imagination. Calm down, Junior Lotus Sunday. My Shifu won't let you die. This senior was specially invited by my Shifu. Senior Zhua's, Shifu? Lotus Sun was even more puzzled. Audiobook dropped his forehead into his hand. The situation had also gotten to his head, and he had almost let slip. My Shifu was only willing to come out for Mr. Sun's sake. Junior Lotus Sun will know the rest later. Fortunately, these words dispelled the girl's suspicions. You two hide behind me and don't move no matter what. Leave the rest to me. The situation was critical. Death Heavenly Tao strode forward and directly grabbed the hook that had been trying to latch onto the girl. This hook was very precise. If Audiobook hadn't been there, Lotus Sun's soul would definitely have been pulled over. It looked like she was already an old hammerstone. At this point in time, the death substitute talisman mass-produced in the Wang family's small villa should have already taken effect. But it still needed time to take effect. It usually took about 2 minutes to take effect. What Death Heavenly Tao needed to do was to catch the thing that had taken Lotus Sun's soul during this 2-minute gap. But it was clear that Death Heavenly Tao hadn't realized at all that this soul gatherer was actually so tyrannical. He had previously thought that some Heavenly Tao little golden man had taken advantage of the situation and covered up the matter. But now it looked like this soul gatherer's origins were probably extraordinary. Death Heavenly Tao held the hook firmly in place and pulled it hard in his direction. The soul gatherer had obviously realized that its hook had fallen into someone else's hands. It hadn't hit its target. Hence, he retrieved the hook lock at the first possible moment. Just like that, the two forces inside and outside the ward began to compete. 2 minutes passed very quickly. The death substitute talisman took effect, and Lotus Sun cried out. It was as if her body had produced a powerful magnetic force that directly sucked her soul in. Joie, at the same time, the soul reaper outside the ward disappeared. Even the chain that had turned into golden powder on the spot. What on earth is going on? Joie was horrified. In short, we can be sure now, this definitely wasn't done by our generation's heavenly Tao. Now that the quality of the heavenly Tao little golden men has been increasing year by year, such violent soul-hooking methods weren't used 1,000 years ago. Death Heavenly Tao wiped his sweat. The accident just now had also shocked him. Fortunately, Death Heavenly Tao finally had some inklings of what was going on. Joie, His Excellency said that it wasn't your Heavenly Tao's doing, which means, Death Heavenly Tao said, there's no mistake. My opponent just now was the ancient Heavenly Golden Man. Only the ancestor of our generation of Heavenly Tao Golden Men. Only an old Golden Man could have such a strong oppressive force. Ancient Gold Men? Where did they come from? The little Golden Man of the Heavenly Tao is constantly reincarnating as time passes. Every Heavenly Tao's reincarnation cycle is different. For example, I've only reincarnated 46 times. Among our 6 main Heavenly Tao, Strength Heavenly Tao has reincarnated the most. It has already reincarnated 262 times. Death Heavenly Tao said, after reincarnating, the Heavenly Tao will inherit the power of the previous Heavenly Tao Little Golden Man. The previous Heavenly Tao Little Golden Man will then disappear substantially. So I also find it inconceivable that this ancient Heavenly Tao Golden Man could appear here. Joie, then what do we do now? Death Heavenly Tao, we've already found a way in. As long as we can capture this ancient Golden Man, we'll know what's going on once we interrogate him. But if we want to capture him, we can only do so during the 2-minute gap when the death substitute talisman takes effect. I didn't use my full strength in the first round just now to test his strength. I'll definitely be able to take him down in the second round. Understanding, Joie nodded slightly. That's all we can do. Right now, they still had to wait for the girl to suddenly die again before they could continue with their operation. In order to ensure that they could capture this ancient Heavenly Tao Golden Man in their next operation, Death Heavenly Tao also took out its Heavenly Tao magic weapon, Book of Death Now. Looking at this book with a black cover, Joie's pupils contracted. That's right. This is my exclusive Heavenly Tao magic weapon, Book of Death Now. Does it mean that as long as you write a name in the book, someone will die? That was the original version. It's already been upgraded. Apart from writing a name, as long as there's anything related to that person, such as hair, fingernails, or used objects, put it in the book. The owner of the object will die immediately. And absorb the soul into the book. Death Heavenly Tao's plan was very clear. Later, as soon as the hook lock appeared, he would open this Book of Death Now, and put the hook lock into the book. At that time, no matter what kind of demon or ghost was outside the door, his soul would be sucked into the book. Of course, the Book of Death Now didn't work on everyone. Users on the Heavenly Tao whitelist, as well as Death Heavenly Tao himself, were all ineffective. After about half an hour, the heavy sound of chains rang out again from outside the ward. When the girl's soul heard the sound of chains, she sat up in shock and left her body. At the same time, she still couldn't remember what on earth had happened earlier. Senior Joie? She looked surprised. Joie had already experienced this expression half an hour ago. He could only repeat what he had said before. Junior Sister Lotus Sun, don't worry, I'll explain later. This senior and I are here to save you. Lotus Sun looked at herself in the hospital bed with a look of disbelief on her face. So I'm already dead? Now, Joie realized. The scariest thing about humans wasn't being a repeater when they were alive. Rather, after death, they were still a repeater. Joie was well aware that now wasn't the time to explain things. Moreover, even if he explained everything to the young girl, if the young girl returned to her physical body, this memory would still disappear. Buzz. Outside the ward, everything was as Death Heavenly Tao had predicted. The hook lock once again passed through the ward. But this time, it was beyond Death Heavenly Tao's expectations. Because this time, there wasn't just one hook lock. There were 3 of them. These shameless people had actually gone to shake people. Chapter 1271. Now, Death Heavenly Tao was certain that the appearance of these ancient gold men wasn't a misunderstanding. It was clear that this was a premeditated operation. Those outside, I don't know whose orders you're acting on. But have you thought of the consequences for daring to attack the main Heavenly Tao? Death Heavenly Tao's voice was low. He was already so angry that even the suspenders on his overalls trembled with the anger he exuded. Afraid of Death Heavenly Tao, Audiobook took out a basketball from his pocket in the next second and hurriedly stepped back to protect Lotus Sunday, Heavenly Tao. Lotus Sun heard a word that was both very familiar and also very strange. Wasn't this the existence that all cultivators were chasing after like ducks? So this young man standing in front of her to protect her was the embodiment of Heavenly Tao? The girl covered her mouth in disbelief. There are 6 main messengers of Heavenly Tao: life and death, mind, space, time, strength, and soul. This one was sent by my Shifu, Audiobook explained on the side. Lotus Sun was even more surprised. Who on earth is Senior Zhuo's Shifu? Audiobook was silent for a moment. It's Wang Ling. In any case, after the soul returned to the body, all its memories would be wiped clean. Audiobook felt that it was fine to say it now. On the contrary, the girl's expression wasn't as surprised as he had imagined. So that's how it is. Looks like I owe classmate Wang Ling another life. At that moment, the girl's mood was exceptionally complicated. Confusion, emotion, and surprise at hearing his name were all intertwined. But Lotus Sun knew that now wasn't the time to be emotional. You don't look that surprised. I should have thought of it. Lotus Sun smiled and said, we were attacked by Shadow Stream killers earlier, but I can't seem to connect the dots between what happened and what happened. I thought there was something wrong with my memory, but why is Senior Zhuo telling me this? You'll know in the future, Audiobook said. He thought it was a white lie. If he told the girl now, when she returned to the body, all her memories of the out-of-body experience would disappear. It was probably a little cruel. Death Heavenly Tao stood alone in front of the 3 chains, one hand gripping them. The strength of the main Heavenly Tao messenger was at a huge advantage at that moment. Even if the other party was an ancient gold man, he was still no match for the primary Heavenly Tao. His previous question was a warning. The Death Heavenly Tao hoped that these ancient gold men would rein in their horses before it was too late. However, from the looks of it, these gold men were here under orders, so negotiations were useless. Now, there wasn't much time left for Death Heavenly Tao. This is the path you have chosen. Don't blame me for being merciless. With about 40 seconds left, Death Heavenly Tao decisively clamped the 3 chains into the Book of Immediate Death. In an instant, 3 incomparably mournful screams that sounded like vengeful spirits came from outside the ward. Then, these chains were quickly absorbed by the Book of Death. Even the 3 ancient gold men controlling the chains were all absorbed into the book. They became 3 beautiful illustrations. Audiobook sighed in amazement. This was definitely one of the most popular artworks on the PvP site. Audiobook, is everything settled? Death Heavenly Tao snorted. A mere primordial golden man dares to act rashly in front of me? However, this matter did not end there. Your Excellency, do you think the other party will send more people? Audiobook asked. Definitely. They've already noticed us. There was one soul-reaping envoy first, and now there are 3 more. The next wave will definitely be even more. Death Heavenly Tao said, but fortunately, we have something to do now. As long as we pry open the mouths of these 3 primordial golden men before the next wave of soul-reaping envoys arrives, We might be able to find out what happened. After saying that, Death Heavenly Tao went to check on Lotus Sunday. But at that moment, the death substitute talisman took effect again. Just like before. The girl cried out as she was sucked back into her own body. Elsewhere, Audiobook was typing furiously on his phone. Death Heavenly Tao asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm preparing the questions and answers that junior sister Lotus Sun will ask when she wakes up. I don't have to explain later." Next was the interrogation of the 3 primordial golden men. Death Heavenly Tao flipped open the Book of Death, and the spirit of one of the primordial golden men fell out. Audiobook was astonished. These primordial golden men were so burly that they were over 3 meters tall, which was more than half a head taller than Death Heavenly Tao. In the end, they are primordial golden men. Audiobook sighed in his heart as he looked at this scene. He now didn't know whether to say that the primordial golden men were too well nourished, or that the current Heavenly Tao little golden men were underdeveloped. When Death Heavenly Tao heard Audiobook's thoughts, it also felt very aggrieved. This actually had a lot to do with the food they ate. For example, what they ate the most was the expired snacks that Wang Ling had exchanged for them. It would be a miracle if they were underdeveloped. Elsewhere, after grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sent Wang Ling a text message, Wang Ling immediately teleported to the entrance of Kaiguang Temple. Survival Heavenly Tao was helping to produce the death substitute talismans, and they were of good quality, so there was no need to worry about them in the short term. At that moment, Wang Ling looked at the rundown temple in front of him with his hands in his trouser pockets. He had seen everything that grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had experienced in the temple with his king's eye. This Zen Master Golden Lamp indeed wasn't an ordinary person, and grenade-throwing Senior Immortal wouldn't be able to deal with him alone, so Wang Ling felt that it was necessary for him to personally test the waters. Of course, the most important thing was that this Zen Master Golden Lamp seemed to know the whole story. Inside the temple, Zen Master Golden Lamp knocked on the wooden fish. When Wang Ling had appeared at the entrance of the temple, he had already sensed Wang Ling's aura. "Your friend is here." Zen Master Golden Lamp smiled slightly. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sat upright on one side. In the next moment, Zen Master Golden Lamp knocked heavily on the wooden fish in his hand with a dong. In an instant, an incomparably tyrannical wave of spirit power rippled out from the wooden fish. Everything in the temple, including the main door, was covered in a faint golden light. This poor monk has finished the light blessing. Whether your friend can come in or not will depend on his ability. At that moment, Zen Master Golden Lamp was calmly knocking on the wooden fish, brimming with confidence. The light blessing spell that he had become famous for could be said to be invincible in the world. Even Tao Ancestor Wang would be wary of his light blessing spell. Zen Master Golden Lamp laughed in his heart. In this world, ever since Tao Ancestor Wang had entered the infinite cycle of reincarnation like him, his whereabouts had been unknown. It had been a long time since he had used this 100% light blessing spell. When grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had come in earlier, he had only used 5% light blessing spell. Zen Master Golden Lamp was well aware of this. In the present world, it was likely that only the youngsters outside the door were worthy of such treatment. "I'd like to see how much effort it will take for your friend to open this door." Master Golden Lamp smiled. But in the next moment, his smile quickly stiffened, because there was a loud boom at the door. Zen Master Golden Lamp didn't have time to react. The 2 doors had already been smashed into bits of wood on the ground. Zen Master Golden Lamp? At the door, Wang Ling raised his index finger and sighed slightly. He hadn't expected that the door would shatter with just 1% of his strength. After all, when he did eye exercises at school and pressed on the Jingming and Sibai points, his strength was at 100%. Chapter 1272. He had actually broken through the door with just 1 finger. The monk had thought that he and the youngster would be evenly matched opponents. But when he saw Wang Ling break through the door with just 1 finger, the feeling of shock that made one's pupils tremble could no longer be described with words. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal sat upright on one side. He had never doubted the youngster's strength. Brother Ling was still as strong as ever, it had always been the same from the moment he had met him. To be honest, when Wang Ling's fingers had touched the temple door, he had actually been pleasantly surprised. There had never been an opponent in this world who could make him take things seriously. And this Zen Master Golden Lamp in Kaiguang Temple might be one. But after breaking through the door, the pleasant surprise that had arisen in Wang Ling's heart was immediately extinguished. This humble monk has long heard of Ling Zhenren's great name. If Ling Zhenren can smoothly enter my hall of great strength, this humble monk will tell you everything I know. At that moment, Golden Lamp, who had been knocking on the wooden fish with his eyes closed, finally opened his eyes. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had never had a chance to meet the monk's gaze before. Now, he saw Zen Master Golden Lamp open his eyes. They were a pair of intimidating golden eyes, which seemed to have the divine power to wash away all evil in the world. But let's be honest. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal still felt that this was far from the shock he had felt when he had first seen the king's eye. Swastika. Wang Ling could only see Master Golden Lamp's back. But he already knew that the other party had opened the swastika, which was said to be something only the supreme saints of Buddhism were qualified to possess. As the supreme saint of Buddhism, Master Golden Lamp had condensed the energy of each of his reincarnations into his pupils. Now, he had experienced 3,910 reincarnations. There were 3,910 pupils on that side. Now, Wang Ling seemed to understand a little why this Zen Master Golden Lamp was so interested in his king's eye. She was a serious contact lens enthusiast. This swastika was Zen Master Golden Lamp's prized natal item. It could wash away all evil in the world, understand people's reincarnation, and see through their weaknesses. He had condensed his experiences from 3,910 reincarnations into this small swastika. His note was to sort out all the mistakes he had made in these reincarnations, like a collection of wrong answers. Those mistakes in battle, mistakes in positioning, all kinds of wrong combat experience turned into a torrent of history and gathered in Zen Master Golden Lamp's eyes. He firmly remembered these mistakes in his heart. All of this was so that he wouldn't make the same mistake in his next reincarnation. The moment Wang Ling stepped through the doorway, the swastika, which had not been released for a long time, unleashed its divine power at this moment. It resonated with every single tile in the courtyard. Wang Ling stepped on the first tile in the courtyard. This was the pressure of Zen Master Golden Lamp's reincarnation. Wang Ling saw a memory fragment from the monk's first reincarnation, however, this was just a flashback. He saw Liu knocking on the wooden fish alone. The camera zoomed in on the wooden fish. Wang Ling didn't understand. He took another step forward. The second step was indeed more stressful than before. The further one walked forward, the greater the pressure on the floor tiles in the middle courtyard. The reincarnation pressure contained in the tiles behind him would continue to build up. It was impossible for a person to absorb such an enormous amount of information in such a short period of time. No matter how powerful a person is, it's impossible for them to withstand the memories of 1,000 reincarnations in such a short period of time. Zen Master Golden Lamp smiled slightly. When Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal had come in, he had only been going through the motions. Now that Wang Ling was here, he naturally received him with the highest standard. The swastika concentrated the mental pressure from all his reincarnations and spread it out through the tiles in the courtyard. No one would be able to withstand such a terrifying power. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal looked out of the courtyard. Although he didn't doubt Wang Ling's strength, it looked like the youngster in front of him had run into some kind of trouble. He walked step by step in the middle of the courtyard, walking very slowly. Senior Immortal, if your friend refuses to admit defeat because of his pride, you can communicate with him and finally pass on the message to this poor monk. This poor monk won't laugh at him. Zen Master Golden Lamp had a triumphant expression on his face. How could he not know how much mental pressure the swastika exerted? The youngster had only just crossed 1/10 of the road. This 1/10 of the road was the mental pressure of 391 reincarnations. He had lived at least 100 years in each reincarnation, and at most thousands of years. Only someone who had experienced this kind of pressure could truly understand. Zen Master Golden Lamp sighed in his heart. Unfortunately, in the end, this youngster wasn't Dao Ancestor Wang. If it had been Dao Ancestor Wang himself, it definitely wouldn't have been so strenuous. Wang Ling had to admit that he was indeed walking very slowly. But the truth was that he didn't feel much mental pressure. This can be seen from his luxuriant hair. He walked very slowly, deliberately stepping on every tile. On one hand, it was for fun. On the other hand, he wanted to investigate the monk's background through the flashbacks of his memories triggered when he stepped on the tiles. Unfortunately, he had stepped on hundreds of tiles, and those fragmented memories couldn't be pieced together into a complete memory. It could only be said that the monk in the Hall of Great Strength indeed had an extraordinary background. But it seemed that he wasn't as powerful as Wang Ling had imagined. He strolled leisurely over every tile, peeking at the flashbacks of each of the monk's lives. The headache he felt wasn't even as much as the pressure he had felt before the final exam for number 60 middle school. This disappointed him from the bottom of his heart. He opened his hand, and earth-colored spirit power gathered in his palm. Zen Master Golden Lamp noticed this scene in the courtyard. Very quickly, he realized that the youngster was actually using his spirit energy to absorb the elements of heaven and earth, and imitating the tiles in the courtyard, he had created an identical clay brick. The monk instantly laughed. "Do you want this poor monk to integrate his experience of reincarnation into this brick?" Wang Ling didn't answer. He didn't have any experience of reincarnation. Because this was his first life experience, and it hadn't even caught up to reincarnation. What he had done was to fuse all the experiences he had experienced in the past 16 years into this brick. If he could live to be 1600 years old, then the experience in this brick would be 1% of his life experience. If he could live to be 16,000 years old, then the experience in this brick would be 1,000th of his life experience. Of course, Wang Ling didn't know how long he could live. But compared with his long life, the experiences in his hands were definitely a drop in the ocean. Compared with Zen Master Golden Lamp's 3,910 reincarnations, it was also a drop in the ocean. However, he didn't mind sharing what he had experienced all these years with this Zen Master. After condensing the brick in his hand, Wang Ling threw it at Zen Master Golden Lamp from afar. Insignificant skill, the Zen Master didn't even look at it as he raised his hand and directly caught it. And then, there was nothing. The immense mental pressure contained in the memory brick that Wang Ling had thrown directly poured into Zen Master Golden Lamp's mind. In a split second, the Zen Master's whole body twitched, and at the same time, he bled from all his orifices as he trembled like he had been electrocuted. Golden Lamp couldn't believe the terrifying torrent of memories that poured into his mind. That was right, this was a function, his mind was full of functions. Chapter 1273. Master, Gold, Lamp. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal couldn't help shouting when he saw the monk in front of him bleeding from all his orifices. Zen Master Golden Lamp wiped the blood off his face. "Don't worry, I'm fine." This time, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal was truly alarmed. The concentrated spiritual power in that brick. As soon as Wang Ling threw it over, Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal could already sense it. As a true venerate, he didn't dare to accept it. Just the mental pressure emanating from the brick was enough to make him feel extremely uncomfortable. As for Zen Master Golden Lamp, not only did he reach out to take it, he even held on for about 10 seconds before letting go. Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal calculated that 1 second equated to the power of 1 slap in these 10 seconds. Zen Master Golden Lamp had already been hit 10 times by Wang Ling. The key was 10 times. He was still alive. This was what frightened Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal the most. In Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal's view, such a tenacious vitality was already unprecedented and unparalleled. However, although Zen Master Golden Lamp had survived, his current condition was obviously not very good. His face was deathly pale and he looked like he was going to die at any moment, which made Grenade-throwing Senior Immortal extremely worried. "Master, can you still hold on?" "I can still." After saying that, the monk took out a golden pill from his sleeve and threw it into his mouth. This was the golden pill of 9 transformations, a pill refined by the golden lamp in the 2718th life. Originally, the golden lamp had kept it as a precaution in that life. However, starting from the 2718 era, Jin Deng discovered that he seemed to be invincible. In this world, besides Dao Father Wang, there seemed to be no one else that was a match for him. As for this 9 transformations golden pill, it had been passed down from generation to generation until now. At this time, Jin Deng threw the 9 transformations golden lamp into his mouth, and his internal injuries began to gradually recover. He was right. This young man's injuries were not only true injuries, but also serious injuries. Fortunately, the 9 transformations golden pill he had prepared could ignore the effects of serious injuries. Otherwise, ordinary healing pills would definitely not be able to heal his current injuries. True damage plus heavy injury. Zen Master Golden Lamp was horrified. This person was shockingly similar to Dao Ancestor Wang. But he was sure Wang Ling wasn't Dao Ancestor Wang himself. Then, who exactly was this young man? At that moment, Wang Ling had already crossed 2/3 of the way in the courtyard. The expression on his face was still relaxed. Zen Master Golden Lamp's floor tiles didn't give him any pressure at all. She was able to withstand nearly 10 of his palm strikes without dying. Jin Deng could be considered the first. At that moment, Wang Ling stretched out his hand to draw the reincarnation memory brick in front of Jin Deng back into his palm. Since he had already created this memory brick, he would be able to do it. Wang Ling felt that they shouldn't be wasted. In the future, he could use it to determine if the other party was an expert. If he was a real expert, he should be like Zen Master Golden Lamp, who was able to survive a few seconds of contact. He carved the number 10 on the brick with his index finger, and then put the memory brick into the king's eye. This represented the longest time the memory brick had been held. Zen Master Golden Lamp's current time was 10 seconds, which was also the record holder. Wang Ling wanted to see if anyone else could break this record in the future. This penniless monk has reincarnated for 1,000 lifetimes, but this penniless monk actually encountered a wall here. At that moment, Zen Master Golden Lamp stopped striking the wooden fish. Although the 9 transformations golden pill had stopped his injuries, striking the wooden fish was also a form of cultivation in itself. His wooden fish was called Heavenly Fish, and was a magic artifact that was bound to the body for cultivation. Every time he struck it, his body would simultaneously suffer a blow of 100 billion tons. In essence, it was a process of tempering the body. But in his current state, he already couldn't strike it anymore. If he didn't seize the opportunity to rest, he would die with another strike. In fact, these words in Zen Master Golden Lamp's heart saved his life once again. Although Wang Ling hadn't arrived at the Hall of Great Strength, he had always been curious about the wooden fish in Zen Master Golden Lamp's hand. He had wanted to take this opportunity to strike it, but since the wooden fish was bound to Master Golden Lamp's body, Wang Ling felt that he shouldn't continue being mischievous. If he wasn't careful and smashed the wooden fish, Master Golden Lamp might explode in front of him. With one foot in the Hall of Great Strength, Wang Ling compared the pressure inside and outside. He indeed felt a lot more relaxed. But the difference actually wasn't that big. This mental pressure was like removing the weight of a school bag. This little benefactor, who on earth are you? Zen Master Golden Lamp looked at Wang Ling. The question finally returned to the question of, who the hell are you? Wang Ling fell silent. He didn't even know who he was. Until today, he still hadn't found the answer to this question. This poor monk has never been so eager to know the answer in all these years. At that moment, Zen Master Golden Lamp turned his gaze to Wang Ling. At the same time, he was already mentally prepared. As long as he could know the answer, even if he ended up dead in this life, he would be content. Master, I may not die in this life. There's a 50-50 chance of that happening. But we came to find you because, I know. The monk laughed and kept them guessing. So I've already left the answer, which you will only receive after I die. Those are my brother's eyes. I don't want the eyes. The monk shook his head. He had already experienced Wang Ling's strength. He completely understood. He couldn't afford this pair of beautiful eyes. Zen Master Golden Lamp sighed slightly. So now I've changed my mind. I only ask that this benefactor Wang stand in front of me and let me have a look. Can you see clearly, Master? Not necessarily, but I want to try, said Zen Master Golden Lamp. It was clear that the monk was a very stubborn person. He wouldn't give up until he achieved his goal. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, Wang Ling shrugged with an indifferent expression. Even he couldn't see through this secret, let alone the monk in front of him. Then I'll start. Zen Master Golden Lamp smiled. He nodded at Wang Ling. The next moment, the Buddhist light of the swastika shone from his eyes again. In an instant, Zen Master Golden Lamp's eyes were bloodshot. This one glance contained the power of his reincarnation from 3,000 lives. His vision transcended time and space, and he saw through the Milky Way. Then, Zen Master Golden Lamp closed his eyes. One of his swastikas had already been scrapped. At the same time, there was an explosion in the atrium. On the ground, the 3,000 memory bricks that symbolized Zen Master Golden Lamp's 3,000 lives shattered with a loud bang and turned into dust. Zen Master Golden Lamp had never dreamed that this would happen. He had used up the cultivation of 3,000 lives. In the end, he ended up in a chaotic world of light and darkness. He found the outline of a figure. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.